81. This is a trap. Isaac's triumphant taunt echoed across the barrier, his smug, bird-like head appearing and reappearing on the kaleidoscopic wall as if peering down from every angle. The Night Watch felt like caged birds. Doom was a beast pinned to its snare. Outside support pounded the barrier with artillery, but whatever laws of physics their weapons obeyed dissolved against the riotous membrane. The shots died harmlessly on colors that shifted and swallowed the blasts. Inside the twisted demon realm, darkness writhed like a snake across the ground, while shards of light leapt and scattered like a frightened deer trying to flee. Then came the warning, crackled over handhelds. Brothers, beware, flesh corruption. Our power armor is showing biological mutations. The corrupting will of flesh spread like a stain. Men fighting with every ounce of discipline watched in horror as fresh, pulsing tendrils of tissue crawled out from seams of their suits. One of the Night Watch bellowed to his squad, voice raw with panic and authority. This is no longer the real realm. The gods' defiling power is affecting our equipment. Since they had crossed into the city, their comm channels had been overwhelmed by screams, otherworldly, serrated howls that chewed up signal and sense. They had been forced to cut transmissions to avoid madness on the frequencies. In this chaotic, lawless space, the demons encountered no barriers. They moved freely, hunting through the disorder with the ease of predators in their element. They tore through reality itself, emerging from impossible angles. At times, the creatures didn't even fully materialize before striking. Bloody, weaponized limbs thrust through space and impaled a warrior before the rest of the monster had a chance to appear. Malice swelled in the chaotic realm. The demons grew stronger, and their seeming immortality became harder to deny. A tide of malevolent, disorienting thoughts washed over the defenders, sapping their resolve. Twisting gravitational vortices yanked at them, destabilizing the Night Watch, while fractured, chaotic light warped everything their eyes tried to make sense of. A trap? On the roiling battlefield, Doom blew through the demons around him with savage efficiency. He killed one after another with brutal punches, his voice low but carrying clear over the chaos. He had a bloodthirster pinned beneath his boot, and his warhammer raised to the sky. Blood smeared his face, but a cruel, exhilarated light shone in his eyes as he sneered, "Can a sheepfold hold a fearless hero? Or can a noose capture a dragon? I brought my warriors here for only one purpose." Doom cried, lifting his warhammer with both hands. The resolve in his eyes was unmistakable, raw, unwavering. He let out a single, thunderous roar, "To destroy everything here." The hammer came down. The impact was deafening, a titanic strike suffused with pure will that seemed to shake heaven and earth. The blow did not merely hit the ground, it struck at the heart of the City of Truth, a direct challenge to the chaotic realm itself. The barrier shuddered, and space itself seemed to scream. Demons staggered and reeled, knocked dumb by the collision of absolute wills. Many could barely find the strength to kneel, let alone move. This was no ordinary physical attack. Doom's hammer struck the very essence of chaos, a force of will and fury made manifest. Isaac's projection on the chaotic barrier flickered. His consciousness, which had stretched into the chaos, took a savage hit. For a moment, the ruleless, orientationless chaos, the place with no up, down, left, or right, reasserted the common laws. Gravity returned. The dizzying rotation snapped into three-dimensional order. Darkness ebbed away, and light returned. "You are truly too powerful, beyond my expectations. No wonder the gods favor you." Isaac said it with a mix of admiration and pain, shaking his bird-like head to clear the dizziness. The earth-shattering blow had struck the chaotic wizard at the city center, knocking him off his feet and driving him down into the center of the eight-pointed star. Seeing that terrifying power in iron will ignited a poisonous envy in Isaac's fevered heart. The thing he had spent his life clawing for, power, came naturally to others. He remembered kneeling and begging the gods for mercy, only to feel their gaze settle on Doom instead. And yet, as the situation unfolded, a dark, perverse pleasure rose inside him, the idea of orchestrating and savoring the downfall of a demigod. To betray his own pride and become a servant of the gods, what a delicious, blasphemous revenge. To kneel before them and kiss their feet would be the ultimate humiliation he could ever inflict upon himself, and through that self-abasement, upon Doom. A thin, triumphant laugh escaped him. Cackle, cackle, cackle. With that gleeful, sinister sound, Isaac unleashed the power of chaos, and alongside the other divine priests, began the grand ritual. The image on the barrier winked out, and the priests' chanting drifted back from the darkness like a summons. Urgency flared in Doom's chest. The servants of chaos would not surrender. More horrors were gathering. The Night Watch were already cracking under the pressure of the demon tide. Their bodies would tire, their nerves fray. These fearless warriors had followed him without complaint. He had to get them back. Doom swung his warhammer harder and sped toward the center of the ritual. Through the rent in the sky, the power of chaos poured, driven by the incantations, seething into the broken ward and bolstering the demons below. Drip, drop. Guided by the priest's words, sickly green droplets began to fall. This was no ordinary rain. It was the blessing of the chaos god Nurgle, a tormented gift that brought rot and disease. A grinding, corrosive hiss spread through the air as the drops sought every weakness. Where the dimensional shields flickered, the pestilent rain slipped in. Harlan was in the thick of it, cleaving through oncoming foes with the light of darkness, when raindrops began pattering onto his power armor. Each drop hissed and gave off a sickly green smoke. Under the corrosive rain, the plates blistered and peeled away as if his suit were rotting like flesh. "Corrosive rain," he barked. The champion swordsman's voice carried anxious urgency as he relayed the discovery. "Harlan Ogilvy." From the front, Doom growled and summoned his guard. Seeing the acid-like shower eat through armor, he understood the situation at once. At the current pace, they would never reach the ritual site before every weapon and piece of equipment was ruined. In the chaotic realm, armor was more than comfort. It was the last defense against mutation and corruption. If the ritual continued, the whole Night Watch would be annihilated. There was only one choice. "Follow me," Doom yelled from the lead, waiting for Harlan to close the gap. He meant to strike for the ritual center with his guard and stop it himself, even if it meant abandoning the main column for a time. Harlan was the only man who could keep up. Doom even slowed so Harlan could catch him, and they could still move swiftly. "Everyone else, form a defensive ring," he ordered, turning his face toward the storm. "Take cover behind anything that hasn't been corrupted, and hold until you get further orders. Go." With that command, Doom grabbed Harlan's arm and split off from the main body, driving straight for the center of the 8-pointed star where the ritual churned. The Night Watch needed no more instruction. Disciplined and practiced, they fell into formation and used the untainted barricades to hold back the tide. Demon heat and shadow cascaded down like rain. Master and servant pressed forward into the roiling chaos. "These little demons just won't stop," Harlan panted, sprinting to keep up with Doom. He could afford the tiniest of rests in the wake of the giant's advance, slashing at any imp that tried to flank or swarm them from behind. There are endless minions of chaos. The only way to stop them is to break that ritual at its heart. Doom's warhammer became a spinning blur. Any creature that came within reach was smashed into nothing. Around them, the rules of reality frayed. Time folded and stretched, and distance lost its ordinary meaning. Measured space still existed in some numerical sense, but it wasn't something you simply walked across anymore. For beings like Doom, those changes were manageable. Distance remained a thing he could fix and manipulate. He could choose to close or widen the gap. For ordinary mortals, and for Harlan in particular, distance was only an abstract, slippery idea. He had to rely on reflex and the shadow of Doom's presence more than on any true sense of how near or far they were. The distance to their destination might have been right in front of them, yet they could neither approach it nor retreat, forced to accept the disorder of chaos. They could walk 10,000 years and never arrive, or find themselves standing beside it the next instant. Doom and his companion moved with impossible speed. Doom didn't need to dodge or detour. His iron will forced the chaotic realm to fall back. He planted his iron boots into the void, and ground formed beneath his feet. If a house loomed in the way, the space folded like a kaleidoscope and opened into a clear path the next moment. Only a keeper of secrets or a great demon in the service of the four gods could possibly stand in his way. Ordinary demons couldn't even approach before being scorched by his blazing will. They cut down demons as they went and soon reached the center of the 8-pointed star. There, a circular sacrificial pit yawned, though the angle kept its interior from view. A chill gripped Doom's heart. A bad premonition slid in like ice. Oh ho ho. A nauseating chuckle echoed through the void, and a voice that was at once familiar and alien reached his ears. The fury in Doom boiled over the moment he heard the voice. It was one he could never forget, Ennio Novick. Beneath a twisted, thorny spire, Ennio emerged, dragging a malformed longsword whose warped blade left a smear of foul-smelling slime across the stone. The refinement that used to belong to him was gone. His golden hair had taken on a sickly pallor, and one of his emerald eyes had turned an unnatural violet. "No," Doom said, staring at his once brother with none of the pity he once felt. "Your existence defiles the name Novick." "Then will you kill me, brother?" Ennio asked. Doom raised his warhammer and said nothing. From the shadows, Harlan stepped forward and planted himself between the two men, signaling Doom to move on. "Leave him to me. You shouldn't stain yourself with fratricide. Go stop the ritual. I'll handle him." Doom glanced at Ennio, then at Harlan, and without another word pushed onward. He trusted Harlan. There were fewer demons around the ritual's center, and in a one-on-one fight, Harlan would not lose to Ennio. Ennio made no move to stop him, only a graceful, almost mocking little bow, as if to plead. The Keeper of Secrets, the great demon who possessed him, could barely suppress a laugh as it pictured what was about to happen. "Give me some votes. The author's world is falling apart." Chapter 82. Chaos has no bottom line. Traitor! Harlan dropped into a horse stance, dark light held high in his right hand. The gunstock rested across his left forearm, the black blade leveled dead at Ennio. Champion swordsman. Ennio twisted his longsword and launched into a slow, graceful sword dance, circling Harlan with a face of practiced indifference. The Keeper of Secrets spoke in a languid voice. It sounded bored, but the disinterest was a mask. "What, Nightwatch, are you going to betray your oath?" It knew the Nightwatch's second oath as if it had lived it. Hearing it challenged sent a twisted thrill through the thing inside Ennio. The pain racking the host's soul tasted like fine wine to the Keeper of Secrets. Harlan's reply rasped through the respirator grill. "Have you been down here so long your mind's gone rotten? The second oath binds us to King Nowick, not to you, traitor." "Boring," the Keeper of Secrets taunted. But no amount of sneering could break Harlan. The great demon, arrogant and confident, found it could not shake the disciplined warrior's will. In trying, it only made itself look a fool. The Keeper of Secrets shifted its weight and struck, adopting a deliberately seductive stance. Even in a human body, its footwork was wrong, not merely skilled, but otherworldly. The curved longsword seemed to come alive, coiling and snapping like a venomous serpent. It spat a searing spray of poison as it lunged for Harlan. The technique was uncanny, inhuman. Harlan's pupils pinched tight. He had never seen swordplay like this. No one from the throne should fight in such a fashion. He brought the gun up and used the barrel to parry the bladed strike, shouting through clenched teeth, "You're not Ennio." In their previous meeting in the throne hall, Ennio's style had been odd, yes, but always grounded in the upright, balanced training of the royal sword. This was something else entirely. The thing before him laughed, a wet, delighted sound that seemed to relish Harlan's confusion. "I am Ennio, prince of the Nowick royal family," it crowed, mocking. "Scum, you defile the Nowick family." Harlan spat, fury flaring. He'd seen the truth. This was no prince. It was a demon wearing Ennio's skin, an impostor that lurked behind a royal face and reveled in its villainy. "Oh dear, I've been discovered." The Keeper of Secrets cackled, its poisoned longsword flashing as it twisted the energies of the Chaos Demesne. The blade jabbed again and again at the human before it. "I am no longer confined to the real universe. Even in this humble disguise, I can still kill you." It remembered the wolf-fox guise it had worn in the throne hall when Harlan had driven it back. "Coincidence?" Harlan roared, no longer restraining the dark light in his hand. He met the demon's poisoned blade with his gunblade. The clash of metal rang out, and the impostor's sword snapped under the impact. Before the creature could recover, Harlan's spear, its force undiminished, came down toward the false man's neck. "I am not who I once was either," he snapped. Having drunk from the primordial soup, his strength and reflexes had multiplied. Against a demon trapped in a human shell, he could dominate completely. For a heartbeat, he pictured a head rolling. Then, at the last possible moment, he halted the spear. In Ennio's emerald eye, he saw relief, and on the imposter's face, a new, calculating cunning. "I think I understand your condition now." With a single, controlled sweep of his long spear, the man twisted Ennio's limbs until the joints dislocated. Around them, the throng of demons thinned. Doom was racing toward the sacrificial pit at the center of the Chaos eight-pointed star. The sight made his pupils snap tight with shock. Rage flooded him until his whole body shook. He gnawed his teeth, his eyes went bloodshot and bulged, and he raised a hate-filled, keening roar. "Chaos!" The cry rolled against the barrier, full of boundless hatred, and its scorching fury made chaos itself tremble. King Nauk stood there, stunned. His wounds had closed, his strength returned, but not just returned. He was stronger than before, suffused with chaotic power, swelling to Doom's height while remaining hollow, like a puppet without a master. In the center of the star sat an altar, 3 meters tall and carved with chaotic runes. Queen Daisy lay exposed, her body splayed like a crucifix, her palms nailed to the altar with rusty iron spikes. A single long incision gaped from her throat to her lower abdomen. Her sternum and ribs had been pried open with hooks and pinned to the altar with iron nails, her organs laid bare. Her skin was carved with wicked chaos runes. Fresh blood welled from the lines and dripped, drop by drop, into the sigils etched into the altar. The chaos array seemed to be keeping her alive, a living link between her and the stone beneath her. Daisy was still conscious. She endured the torment with her eyes shut, teeth biting her already raw lips. "Scum!" she spat. Doom's roar was equal parts fury and agony. He had come to the City of Truth precisely because he feared his mother would be tortured. That had driven him in, and seeing it for himself filled him with shame for having arrived too late. He saw his father, too, his body warped by chaos magic, turned into a puppet to be used and discarded. Doom's stomach clenched. Now he finally understood what the Elder had warned him about when he called chaos an extreme with no bottom line. A thin, sickly laugh echoed from behind the altar. "Giggle, giggle, giggle." "Does it hurt?" a voice purred. "Do you like what I've prepared for you?" Isaac stepped out from the shadows behind the altar. He was hunched, bird-like in posture, and he carried a staff the color of deep jade blue. "I want you dead!" Doom had thrown everything into that one command. He had carved a bloody path to this place, siphoning countless demonic powers along the way. Right now, he was terrifyingly strong. With his warhammer raised, he could have smashed Isaac's skull to dust before the priest could even blink. No, he would not be allowed to escape so easily. Doom's killing intent hardened into something almost tangible, manifesting as invisible blades within the chaos domain that sliced across Isaac's body, opening wounds. He intended to break the demon priest's limbs, to keep him alive, and rack him with every imaginable torment. Isaac still hadn't moved. When Doom's hammer fell toward his limbs, triumph still painted his face. But someone else on the field did react. From outside Doom's vision, a blood-red greatsword came flying in, cutting across the warhammer's arc and saving the priest from having his limbs shattered. The greatsword, its force undiminished, drove into the stone slab beneath them and planted itself there. Doom stood stunned and bewildered. He looked up. Nauk, towering as tall as Doom, faced him and offered a broad, untroubled smile. Only then did Isaac finally snap out of his daze. He screamed, beat his winged arms frantically, and fled. "Make no mistake, I am not your father." The man in Nauk's body gestured toward the blood-red greatsword resting at his side. "I am only borrowing this body to carry out my will and to fight you. Until I have judged which of us is victorious, that cowardly priest will not be allowed to die, and neither will you be permitted to save that woman." He flicked the dust from the blade as if it were a trifle, then spoke directly to Doom. "Mortals dare not speak my true name. They call me the Blood God, but I will grant you a courtesy. Call me Khorne." At the word, lightning, the color of coagulated blood, cracked through the chaos domain. Red rain poured from the rent in the veil, and the name itself echoed through reality. Doom's expression went hard. His fingers tightened involuntarily on his warhammer. He knew, with the chill certainty of the initiated, that the thing inhabiting his father's body was not merely powerful, it was a god from the warp. He wiped the crimson from his face and stared at the speaker. "Why?" he demanded, bafflement and anger warring in his ice. "Why have you set your sights on me?" It didn't make sense. The elder had warned him, gods rarely left the warp, and even less often did they bother with a single mortal. He stood there beneath a weight he could almost feel, the gaze of the four gods fixed on this place. From the blood god's step came a single, flat word: love. Doom stared up at Khorne. Love? He wanted no god's love. All he felt for them was a hatred that sat in his bones. No more words. There was no avoiding it. He charged. "Come, boy," the blood god bellowed, and the two wills collided. Khorne's brutal battle intent against Doom's cold, unrelenting killing intent. From the skull throne, an endless fury kindled and spilled into the real world, a living rage made manifest. Sword met hammer. Sparks and fragments flew as metal rang on metal. The strongest warrior in the real universe had thrown down to challenge a god. In a thunderous clash, Doom's hammerhead split clean in two. Mortal steel, no matter how well forged, no matter what masterwork hands had shaped, could not withstand a weapon blessed by a god. The hammer Nauk had given him shattered like his own fate. He had known, from the instant he struck, that facing a god would mean utter destruction. Yet driven by forces beyond his control, by duty, by defiance, by whatever had bound him to this course, he still moved forward without regret. The sound of that impact was overwhelming, like an earth-moving machine tearing the world apart. Brothers, it was unbearably fierce. Let's leave it at that for today. Tomorrow I'll release Judgment Sword. This chapter has been revised following the review. Chapter 83. Farewell, Father. Doom's warhammer split in two. He seized the broken hilt and swung it with blinding speed, driving the assault onward. Khorne was the warp's greatest warrior. Doom was the strongest fighter in the material world. In the warp, an evil, chaotic realm, Khorne's power was overwhelming, peaking brutally whenever he manifested. Against that, Doom's hatred and thirst for revenge fused into a single, relentless onslaught. When the weapon failed, Doom used his fists. Hate-charged arms turned into god-slaying iron. Each blow landed like thunder. Exhilarating, exhilarating, the blood god bellowed, abandoning his greatsword to meet Doom blow for blow. They collided with earth-shaking force, roaring as metal and flesh gave way to raw, unfiltered strength. Khorne had promised his divine brethren this pure duel. After the ritual and its terrible choice, Doom's fate would be sealed, no longer vague, no longer uncertain. The gods had decreed he must choose. So they forced the contest. Fist against fist, foot against foot. Savagery met savagery. Power met power. The clash of one mortal against a god was a terrifying thing to witness. The shockwaves they sent out made Isaac tremble. He had to hide far away just to survive. He didn't even dare to peek. Their movements had long since outrun mortal perception. A priest who had not yet ascended to demonhood could not possibly track the speed of two beings who had transcended humanity. Khorne, the very avatar of violence, used Nauic's body as a blunt instrument of slaughter. The blood god's presence warped Nauic's dignity into something hideous, a grotesque mask of fury, blood-red eyes emptied of reason, and roars that were nothing but pure primal savagery. Opposite him, Doom fought like iron. His blows were silent and inexorable. His eyes were cold with resolve, his face set in a stern, heroic mask, the desire for vengeance carved into his brow. Seeing his father's desecrated corpse only steeled him further. Each punch came harder than the last, as if his iron fists themselves challenged the blood god for the sacrilege. Sonic booms rolled across the battlefield, shockwaves tearing the air. The sacrificial pit trembled and the chaotic domain itself shook. The demons around them quailed. They could feel their god's will descending and grappling with a foe of terrible power. The Night Watch surged with renewed ferocity. Only a clash with Doom could be so intense. Doom was fighting a god. The relentless, lightning-fast onslaught began to take its toll on Khorne's mortal shell. Muscles burned and lagged during the furious exchanges, and the blood god, furious at the weakness, had to hasten the flow of chaotic power to sustain the body. Even so, the rate of deterioration outpaced the infusion. Doom's blows were merciless, and Khorne answered in kind, but each trade left the god's form more ragged, more vulnerable. Then a hook landed that Khorne could not ward off. The punch drove into the god's chest and sent the blood god tumbling backward. As the body flew, blood-red ichor and dark chaos poured from nose and mouth, but Khorne still roared. Not exhilarating, not satisfying, not complete. Detecting the flaw in the attack, Khorne twisted the outcome. An iron fist that had been aimed for its head was deflected and slammed into its chest instead. Doom had felt the hesitation the moment his blade came down. The body before him had once been his father's. Even now, twisted and possessed, Doom wanted, if only for a moment, to leave him whole. He had paused, if only on principle. The blood god slammed its hands into the earth, bracing itself and holding the faltering corpse steady before it could collapse. Its blood-red eyes locked on Doom as he charged. It shook its head, a sound like iron grinding, and growled, "Impurity defiles the battle. Do not let emotion stain your purity." "What purity is that?" Doom snapped back. "A killing machine that only knows how to fight?" He didn't wait for an answer. Words turned into motion, into a flurry of fists and blades, each strike carrying the blunt accusation. "This broken body is at its end," he shouted between blows. "Let me help you purify it." The counterstrike came without ceremony. Doom was hurled backward, slammed aside by a force that answered no pleading. The blood god did not debate feeling. It embodied raw, unreasoning violence, and recoiled from anything that did not bend into blood and wrath. Obeying its will, a river of crimson poured down from the warp, an endless flood that swallowed Nawick's still-standing body. Doom threw himself after it, plunging into the torrent with everything he had. Blood soaked the air as he hauled a body out of the river of blood. The crimson mist peeled away, and the thing in his arms revealed itself with a terrible, grinning certainty. The grin of the blood god. It was his father, Nawick, but twisted beyond recognition. The face had become something like a bloodthirster's. His skin stained a blood-red hue, and his frame was sheathed in dull brass armor. "I will kill you," Doom shouted. His eyes were shot with red. The last of his illusions had shattered. All he had wanted was to give his father a whole corpse to bury, but that simple wish had been poisoned and dissolved by the evil god's manipulation. He unclenched his hands from the corpse and moved behind the thing, locking his arms around its waist. He took the god's flurry of punches into his own body, letting the blows rain down on him so the ruined form in his arms would not be further mangled. Bruised and bleeding, Doom held the struggling god tight and stared into its furious eyes. "I am a human being," he said, voice raw, "a human being of flesh and blood and feeling." "Khorne," the god roared, "leave his body and let him rest. One day in the future, when I kill you, I will give you a quick end." Doom's large hands tightened until Khorne had no chance to answer. The blood god's eyes flashed a single word, "Impossible." Then he drove an elbow into Doom's skull. Blood spurted from his nose and mouth. Khorne was the living embodiment of strife. He would not be cowed by threats. Doom had given himself to the blood god, lavishing him with devotion and favor. But Khorne's kind of love demanded submission. It tolerated only acceptance, never refusal. Doom began to bleed from all 7 orifices as Khorne fought back, yet he seemed unaware of the pain. He looked once more at the blood god and at the body that still bore 3/10 of his father's likeness, then closed his eyes. Summoning the last of his strength, he pushed with his arms. There was a sickening crack as the blood god's incarnate lumbar spine collapsed beneath that force. Without the support of its lower spine, any vertebrate is rendered helpless. "No! No! No!" Khorne flailed and screamed, not with the triumphant rage of a killer, but with a raw, overwhelming pity, the only emotion left in the act of murder. "In your immortal life, mortals are but passers-by. These lowly emotions will only hinder you," the blood god spat. Doom said nothing. He seized the back of the king's neck with one hand and the small of his back with the other, lifting the struggling figure high. Gods could never truly understand the fragile, finite attachments of mortals, and yet, when Doom thought of King Nawick, a small warmth still rose in his chest. He tightened his grip on the blood god's hands. It was time to end this and give his father release. "Begone, Khorne." Doom hauled Nawick down with brutal force. The king's back slammed into Doom's knee, blood spurted, and Nawick's body dissipated into a spray of crimson, shattered flesh and will that could no longer hold together. "How unsatisfying!" The blood god snarled. Its will congealed into a bloody mist and fled, a last echo of fury reverberating through the void. It had expected a glorious, blood-drenched spectacle. Instead, the confrontation collapsed into a merciful end, an outcome that left it bitterly displeased. With the blood god's departure, the demon-possessed shell of Nawick turned to drifting ash and scattered on the wind. The key, Nang, what remained of him, was gone from the world. Doom reached out for the ashes, but his hand closed on nothing, like smoke that had never been. "Farewell, father," he murmured. A gentle sound was all it took to see Nawick go. In the years to come, there would be no grave to mark him. Nawick had been the kindling of Doom's life. He'd burned himself away into embers and dust, but the blaze he'd begun and the heat of it would live on in Doom's heart. Doom rose and turned. Nothing could stop his vengeance now. His steps were a funeral drum, his face hard as ice as he walked straight toward Isaac. There was a lethal edge in his eyes, sharp as a carving knife, promising slow, deliberate torment. As Doom advanced, a crushing pressure settled over Isaac. His body shuddered. He did not, however, look panicked. There was no raw terror in his gaze. He knew how Doom loved Daisy, and he knew that love could be a fault line. The tall shadow fell over the shivering wizard, and Doom laid a hand on Isaac's shoulder, smiling with a cruelty that never reached his eyes. Wizard and warrior stood face to face, Isaac sweating, unable to risk a sudden move. The man before him had just banished the blood god's will back into the warp. Against a being like Doom, any defiance would have brought a thunderous response. "End the ritual," he ordered. He smiled, but there was no amusement in the smile, only a dark, motionless calm in his eyes. Crack! With a single, precise squeeze of his fingers, Doom shattered the delicate, hollow bone in the priest's shoulder. The man's arm went limp. He cried out. Doom's superhuman hearing picked up Daisy's pained groan coming from the altar. His chest tightened. He grabbed the priest and vaulted onto the stone slab beside him. Daisy lay at the altar's center, her body ravaged by chaotic energies. Her shoulder had collapsed in the same ruined way as the priest's. Isaac, the priest, forced his robe open with a black, clawed hand. Beneath the fabric there were no feathers. Instead, his skin was marred by the same chaotic runes that scarred Daisy. "The chaotic runes bind my life and Lady Daisy's together," Isaac said, his voice raw. "We live and die as one." Chapter 84, The Promise of the Gods. "Do not try to kill me or Daisy to stop the ritual." Isaac and Doom locked eyes. Isaac glanced away for a moment, shame flooding his face. "We are a trinity," he said, voice quavering. "If one is harmed, all are harmed." The sigils carved into his skin seemed to lend him courage. His voice steadied. "The ritual cannot be stopped. This is the will of the gods. They will not allow it to be interrupted." Doom stared at the priest, a cold understanding settling over him. This chaos ritual had been prepared by the gods for him. How many absurd, monstrous things had this hideous birdman done under their command? Doom's fingers curled until his knuckles cracked. He wanted nothing more than to skin the creature alive. Isaac's heart pounded in his chest, only moments before he had dared mock Doom, but now fear silenced him. Doom took a slow breath and held back from further harm to Daisy. Instead, he ripped Isaac's robe from his shoulders and threw the priest aside like a worm, utterly stripped of dignity. He gently covered his mother's body, restoring a sliver of dignity to her, shielding her from further desecration by chaos. Doom looked up at the rent in the sky, corrupted by chaos, a direct breach to the warp. "Gods, I know you've always been there," he said. There was no shout, no hatred, no fury in the words. They were nearly emotionless. Calm echoed across the sacrificial pit as he stared at the shattered heavens and stated a fact. The presence of the Four had been with him all along. They had watched from the depths of the warp, arranged the altar, and given him a choice. When Doom called, 4 figures slid out of the warp's void. They were the wills of the chaos gods made visible, putrid, swelling sickly green, a depraved, craving purple-pink, a fickle, shifting blue-gray, and a tyrannical, blood-red rage. They appeared without fanfare or flourish, as if they had existed there since before time. In silence, they regarded him, the gaze of the gods converging on the amphitheater-like sacrificial pit. Boom! Blue flames licked the rim of the sacrificial pit. Thick, rotting grass shoved up through the soil. A scalding rain of blood hissed down, and cursed thorns exploded out of the earth. With nothing more than a gaze, the god's concepts bled into reality. Barring some unforeseen event, this land would become their eternal dominion. "Ah!" Isaac screamed. His hunched body began to contort, shredding into grotesque, multiplying mutations. Under the god's stare, the priest crawled in agony. Thorns tore into his flesh, the bloody rain seared and corroded his skin, and rot crawled through every cell. "Lord of Change," he wailed, voice ragged and supplicant, calling on the deity to whom he had devoted everything. The god did not answer. It did not even look at its worshipper. Its attention was fixed on the altar, on the man who stood tall and unbowed, meeting the divine gaze without a flicker of fear. Doom saw Isaac's transformation and stepped instinctively in front of Daisy, shielding her from that terrible glare. Whether by Doom's protection or by the will of the gods themselves, Isaac's mutation did not spread to Daisy. Maybe the gods had simply decided Daisy would not be allowed to change. Isaac did not get that mercy. He howled and screamed as the demonic body grafted to him writhed under a new corruption, an amalgam of all four gods, each infection clamoring for dominance. Wings and tufts of feather burst from his back. His flesh swelled and blistered until it festered. Grotesque new organs pushed out where none had been, his fingers sharpened into claws, and his teeth twisted into serrated blades. The sound of his agony was a keening, never-ending. Doom, once an elegant, composed high priest, but now a pitiful wretch abandoned by chaos, watched with cold detachment. Isaac's mutations kept racing through him, genes rewiring and reorganizing with chaotic speed, limbs tearing and reforming until at last arms and legs and torso fused into a single grotesque oval of flesh with a face. The creature's expression was dull and hollow, the final, most desecrated form of a chaos egg. "Do you like it? My gift." The voice was ethereal, alien, its syllables never repeated, yet the meaning came through perfectly. "Lord of Change," Doom breathed. Beside the sacrificial pit, in the void above the blood and smoke, a phantom the size of a man sat cross-legged. Its form flowed and shifted constantly, never twice the same. "I only feel pity," Doom said, shaking his head. "I despise what he did. I wouldn't hesitate to kill him, but I pity a soul that's been toyed with." "Is that so?" Tzeentch considered the words, then drew a phantom image in the air with a slow, deliberate motion. A scene unfolded between them. Doom's bitterest memory, every detail of that day in the throne hall laid bare. His arrogance and conceit caused a deviation in the plan, the changeling intoned. "I merely discarded an unwieldy tool." Doom let out a small, disbelieving shake of the head. You couldn't trust the words of chaos, not when they came wrapped in spectacle. "You're different," he said instead. Tzeentch's voice remained eerily calm, like an elder who has seen too many seasons to be ruffled. "Doom, why do you think I'm here?" Doom asked. "Because the gods do not want you to worship them," the Lord of Change answered. "They want you to stand beside them as equals." Doom's eyes flicked up at the towering, aloof figures beyond the chamber, and then back down at the woman pinned to the floor. He jabbed a finger toward her. "Then you killed my father and defiled his body," he said. "You nailed my mother to the ground and made her suffer endless humiliation." "That was an accident," Tzeentch protested, his voice unsettlingly calm in the face of Doom's hatred. "An accident that can be fixed. Everything can be recovered." "Recovered?" Doom narrowed his eyes. "How do you propose to recover that?" Tzeentch's shoulders trembled with a kind of eager glee. If there was room to speak, there was room to bargain, and bargaining could mean a price Doom might not refuse, a bond to draw him into the Four Gods' orbit. The Lord of Change began to move, fingers weaving through the air as he mouthed ancient curved syllables. The runes in the sacrificial circle at their feet stayed dark. The array showed no sign of answering his call. Doom watched without surrendering an inch of caution. Then, from the roiling nothing of the warp, a point of cold white light fell, and Tzeentch caught it in his hand, a star of impossible, humming energy condensed into flesh. His withered palm opened, revealing something that made Doom catch his breath. "The soul of your beloved father," Tzeentch said. The god's voice was syrupy with false affection, picking at old wounds. Doom's body trembled. He instinctively lunged, desperate to snatch the tiny light. "Don't be hasty, my dear Doom," Tzeentch crooned, closing his hand like a lid and chuckling to stop him. "What if I get a bit nervous, and this fragile thing simply vanishes?" Nawick's miniature, translucent soul hovered in Tzeentch's palm like a faint, flickering ember. The god chuckled again, then laid out the god's price. "We can resurrect him." Doom's gaze never left that pale mote. He asked in a low voice, "Then what is the price?" He knew there was no such thing as a free lunch. Chaos always demanded an equivalent exchange. Tzeentch's magic shimmered in the air, his words honeyed and persuasive as he painted a future for him. "Swear allegiance to us," the god said. "Swear to us, and you will be the sole chosen of the four gods. We will bind ourselves by a warp oath and never betray you. You will wield our power, command endless armies, and hold a status equal to the gods themselves. Your father, your mother, your brothers, every soldier who follows you, they will be made eternal. They will exist with you forever." Doom listened. He knew the gods were liars, and yet a part of him wavered. What if it was true? Even the smallest chance was a splinter of hope. Swear allegiance, and perhaps everything could be restored, the losses reversed, the deaths undone. "You will be free, cherished by us. We will never constrain you or make demands of you," Tzeentch continued, seeming to sense his hesitation. "Ask anything of us. We will refuse you nothing." Doom looked down at Daisy. Her pained expression tugged at him, and Nawick dared to hope she might be brought back. His heart struggled against reason. The gods' terms were so generous, they felt like a one-sided gift. Chapter 85. Forgive me, Mother. When a warp god swore an oath, it was not a promise to be broken lightly. "Look at what we've prepared for you," Tzeentch said in a strange, lilting accent, spreading its arms and motioning for Doom to take in the scene. "This is a perfect place to swear an oath. How could there be no audience? They are the most fitting witnesses." Like a showman on a stage, it waved, and the audience came forward. The Night Watch appeared, dragging themselves around the edges of the sacrificial pit, exhausted and bewildered as they stared down at Doom. When Tzeentch revealed itself, it had quietly sent the demons away and steered the watch into place, turning them into the ideal witnesses for the ritual. The conversation between god and prisoner carried to every watchman. Doom looked up. Fewer than half of the Night Watch had reached the pit. Half the soldiers had been left outside, forever. Green, corrosive raindrops fell without pause, eating into the bodies of the Night Watch and the gear they still clung to. Armor bubbled and split, exposed flesh festered and sloughed away. Wounds multiplied, strength drained, and their spirits sagged under an ever-present searing pain. The acid tested every limit of their endurance and gnawed at the inner defenses that kept them standing. Still, they held together. In the toxic downpour, the warriors propped one another up, some crawling on hands and knees, yet they alone bore Doom's stretcher, never daring to let it touch the ground. Their appearance was a tragedy, but their core had not broken. They could still fight. Tzeentch allowed the onlookers to enter the pit, wanting Doom to witness the Night Watch's ruin and feel the invisible weight of it pressing on his mind. Only one figure remained outside the barrier, watching Doom with eyes wide and unblinking. Harlan Ogilvy, champion swordsman, Doom's attendant, mentor, and friend, stood apart from the gathered crowd. He was the one who, at the darkest hour, had led Doom up to the Crystal Mountains to seek the ancient sage. Shouldering an ancient artifact and dragging the crippled Ennio behind him, Harlan had made his way to the lip of the sacrificial pit. He paused there, every inch of him ragged from the journey, and stared down at Doom and the maimed Night Watch below. Harlan took off his helmet. His face was a map of conflicting emotions, grief, anger, something like acceptance, and his eyes fixed on Doom with a hard, unreadable determination. He had heard the bargain the evil god had offered, an astonishingly generous proposal. A few loaded words in that deal had unlocked memories that had been sealed inside him, and now, like Doom, he had reached a crossroad where fate demanded a choice. Flames licked across the only path forward, and a shimmering barrier ringed the sacrificial pit. It kept the spectators safe, but also cut the air tight. Sound was strangled inside the circle, so that whatever happened in the pit could not be interrupted. Inside the ring, the mortal warriors were forced to watch as if from a distance, witnesses to a sacred, devastating torment. Doom, a would-be demigod, torn between the voice of a divine oracle and the pull of his own humanity. "Don't fail them," Harlan shouted once, the words raw. Then he pressed the stock of his gun to his chest, and with trembling hands began to sign. Doom watched his lips as well. Harlan mouthed each word with brutal clarity. "He told me to kill you." Tzeentch's mouthpiece leaned forward, relentless. He jabbed a finger toward the haggard figures of the Night Watch huddled in the rain. "Doom," he urged, voice silk over steel. "Swear your oath now. This downpour will not let up. They are walking straight into death." He whispered promises like bait. "Swear allegiance, and all their suffering will end. The fallen will rise and fight at your side." The emissary's words were a steady drumbeat, seductive and merciless. Around the pit, the crowd watched in silence as the tempter pushed, pressing Doom toward a choice that would split lives in two. Tzeentch had believed that Doom's love, for his parents, for the Night Watch, for Nur, would make him choose the way the gods wanted. "Whoa!" Doom exhaled, a long, ragged sound. The boundless physical power and iron will that had carried him this far now felt spent. Fatigue and pressure hounded him from every side. He lifted his head and looked first to the shimmering warp, where expectant divine eyes watched him, then to the ghost of his father clutched in Tzeentch's hand. His gaze swept across the Night Watch standing around him, then came to rest on Daisy. Mortal and immortal scrutiny alike converged on him. He had to decide. Under that unbearable weight, the great man sank to one knee. Tears, part pain, part stubborn refusal, stung the corners of his eyes. He reached out and gathered his mother into his arms. She was astonishingly light, as if sleep had folded her into herself. One arm was enough to hold her. Wrapped in a robe, Daisy looked like a sleeping beauty, peaceful and innocent in her son's broad embrace. "Please forgive me, Mother," he whispered. The gods had used the lives of the Night Watch, of King Nawick, and of Daisy to force his hand. Doom's palm brushed his mother's porcelain-white cheek, the only part of her that bore no stain of chaos. His fingers trembled, his enormous body trembled, even his heart trembled. He knew the ritual would never end until he made a choice. At its center was Queen Daisy, her life bound to the right, enduring endless torment under the evil god's cruel magic. "Forgive me, Mother," Doom choked. He bowed his head and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Then, with a hand that trembled, he closed around her throat. "I know you're in terrible pain. It's time to say goodbye," he whispered. Under the shocked, wide-eyed scrutiny of the gods, his hand constricted Daisy's slender neck. It felt like a monstrous crime. Doom's fingers shook. Tears tracked down his face, but his resolve did not waver. Only this act, only this, could save the Night Watch. Only this could shatter the god's trap. It should have been easy. The same hand that could fell a great demon and wield power to shake the stars now met 1,000 invisible resistances, as if the world itself resisted the blow. That vast power found it impossibly difficult to deliver the killing strike. It could not spare her life. The gods, momentarily taken aback, leaned forward, ravenous. They drank in the sin of matricide like connoisseurs savoring a rare vintage, intoxicated by the sharp bouquet of pain and sorrow. They fed on the raw, primal evil that rose from the deed, hungering for every scrap of guilt and grief. The warp roiled, torn by the raw emotions of powerful beings. A low, pain-filled cry escaped Doom as the need to kill threatened to shred him apart. Memories flashed through his mind. Her gentleness, her lessons, the quiet, selfless care she had shown him. He hated the clarity of his recall. Every detail was unbearably vivid, and those images made it impossible to strike. Far away on Terra, Li Tang and the Destroyer warriors had just gathered when a wave of sorrow swept over them. Before they could react, long-buried feelings rose to the surface and hot tears streamed down their faces. "What happened?" Li Tang asked his brother, but there was no answer. "Please forgive me, Mother," Doom whispered, saying farewell one last time. He closed his eyes and clenched his fist, as if he could take her pain away. Then, crack! The son who loved her most twisted his mother's neck. Strength drained from him. He lowered his arm limply and laid her back on the ground. Across the warp, the gods watched, torn between grief and triumph. They tasted both sorrow and ecstasy in his choice, savoring the dark perfection of the sin. Waves rolled through the warp, and something powerful stirred the hidden grief living there. Doom rose slowly, head bowed. No one could read his face, only the terrible ache inside him. The warm memories of being cared for felt as if they were being wrenched out of him, cell by cell, pulled away by fresh suffering. He had lost both parents in a single day, and worse still, he had killed his mother with his own hands. The grief he'd been bottling up since his father's death suddenly burst free, spilling out and colliding with the new wound of his mother's loss. Ah! His desperate roar tore through reality and rent into the warp itself. It stung even the demons. They recoiled, searching the storm for the source of such a raw, palpable pain. On Terra, alone in his private chamber, the Emperor's face darkened as he sensed the tempest of anguish in the warp. He closed his eyes and plunged into it. You must not be in danger. Back on the altar, Doom swayed as a black aura coalesced around him. The pain made flesh. The Night Watch instinctively turned away, unwilling to meet him. The materialized agony burned at their eyes and stung their souls. A pure black aura slipped out of the material world and bled into the warp, where it brushed against the biting sorrow of the Sea of Souls. Black lightning lanced through that otherworldly sea, and a storm of pain coalesced, surging forward until it met Doom's grief. The emotions resonated through the warp and folded into one another. The lightning struck like a heartbeat, each flash a pulse. The storm seemed to be giving birth. From its roiling center came a bright, unmistakably female laugh, and a new demigod was born. She stepped out of the black tempest like a living shadow. Her body was the shape of a naked human woman, as dark as oil. Her torso and limbs were ringed with thorns, and in her hand she curled a whip of serrated barbs. She laughed with pain and danced with grief. She named herself the Queen of Pain. Her face was eerily familiar, uncannily like Daisy's. With that same laugh, she melted into black mist and dissolved into the warp, driven by a demigod's instinct to hide from the gaze of the gods. But the storm did not calm when she vanished. If anything, it grew fiercer, plunging the warp deeper, and something older, something deeper still, began to stir. Chapter 86. The Sword's Name. Judgment. Thanks again to Nankei Izui for the tip. Doom rode out the pain like a living thing, feeling the crushing grief ease and the warp itself shift under his awareness. He drew a long, ragged breath and lifted his head to look at the gods, the architects of his suffering. They met his stare across the void, their gazes sparking against one another like lightning. When the worst of the pain passed, what remained was a single, cold thing: vengeance. The realm of chaos shuddered, the warp trembled. Hate carved itself into Doom's face until it was almost unrecognizable, and his eyes burned with a ruthless light. His look slid past the watching gods and pierced deep into the warp beyond. He raised his arm and bunched his fingers into a fist so tight his nails bit into his palm until blood welled and his knuckles cracked under the pressure. The vow tore from him, a word that echoed through the twisting corridors of the warp. Judgment. Even the Emperor, racing through the warp, heard that oath reverberate through the storms. I am Doom. His rage erupted like a volcano. The oath, saturated with hatred, shot outward toward the gods. Even though Daisy was dead, the ritual did not falter. Doom's vow rolled through the warp, a raw, elemental fury manifesting as actual flames licking his skin. His voice, while burning with an intolerable wrath, spoke with an eerie calm, flat, unshaken, as if reciting a simple creed. I am the son of the sky, Nauic's third son. I am. Then the pressure in his chest shattered. A terrible roar tore from him and echoed across the warp. I am the prophesied, destroyer warrior. The warp convulsed with Doom's anger. His oath sent up vast, churning waves. I hate the gods. I swear to kill the gods. I will have my revenge, he bellowed. I will destroy chaos. I will personally slay my enemies. He thundered and vented himself until there was nothing left to give. His challenge to the gods reverberated through the immaterial sea and stirred something vast and long dormant, a power that had slept for countless ages and had never before been roused. The warp contains everything, the sublime and the depraved, the ordered and the obscene. Even its most degenerate and extreme aspects of chaos lay within reach of his vow. For endless ages, the gods had remained unchanged, but there had never been a shortage of forces willing to challenge them. Life in the universe is innumerable, yet only the strong dare defy the divine. Their defiance, the contempt and hatred of those who refused to bow, congealed in the warp, twisted into a single terrible idea, the notion of slaying a god. That idea had always existed, buried in the depths of the warp like a sleeping current. Today, something stirred it awake. A powerful being from the material universe, no warp-born abomination, but a genuine life form, announced himself to the chaos beyond and declared his intent. His fury and loathing resonated across the boundary between realms and roused the long-dormant tide of god-slaying. The concept flowed through the warp like a subterranean river, gathering into a monstrous wave in the void. As it surged, it overpowered every other presence. Its force was a silence that swallowed sound. Demons, mere extensions of the god's will, quailed at the echo of it from afar. Even the four gods fell still, their voices cut off by the rising roar of something older and more dangerous than worship or worshiplessness, the will to kill a god. Arrogant godslayers had left scars in the warp long ago, and now those marks stirred when a man dared to challenge the gods. Driven by that momentum, the godslayer and his weapon completed their fated union. Doom stood at the center of the altar, his whole body wreathed in crimson fury. His declaration of war against the Chaos Gods was answered by the warp itself. Such was the magnitude of his power. The runic sigil burned across his chest, and the wrath within him intensified. From that blazing mark, a powerful, primordial concept poured out, something that had existed alongside the gods since the first days, an ancient and mysterious essence. The Chaos Gods conferred among themselves, but found they could not halt the ritual. The warp had taken Doom's challenge and risen to meet it. Tzeentch, watched by his brothers, focused on the glowing mark. He stared for a long time, longer than any of them expected, and then at last said, "I don't know." Even the god who knows past and future, the architect of fate and sorcery, had no name for what was unfolding. It was not something known to the pantheon. It was the essence of the destroyer warrior, the supreme essence of a creator god. The essence answered Doom. His thirst for vengeance against the gods, his hatred for demons, condensed into concepts: slaughter, eradication, plunder, annihilation. Every violent urge in his soul took on form. Those concepts gathered in his left hand, coalescing into a sigil that matched the runes seared across his chest. Doom could not say what that rune truly was, only that concepts required a vessel. Without one, they would dissipate. Facing the gods, he slammed his fist into the stone altar beneath him. The rock splintered and exploded. He picked up a jagged shard, hoisted it overhead with his right hand, and shouted, "Even if it's only this, if I have but a broken stone, I will still slaughter the gods." He needed a weapon capable of severing divine heads. Endless flames of rage crawled along his arm and into the fragment. The stone structure was remade. Under the furious, purifying fire, its inorganic matter fused and densified until it took on the solidity of iron. The simplest, most primitive impression any sentient mind has of its hardness. Hard is the first concept it evokes. Doom lent that concept to the shard, binding the idea of unyielding hardness into the fragment until it was no longer merely rock, but a blade of concentrated will. Doom pictured the stone becoming a hilt and the surging blade taking shape from his rage and the intent to kill. As the hilt formed, he drove the runic sigil from his left hand into the stone crossguard. The guard split open, and a blade of red light erupted, its surface covered in dense runes, curses woven for slaughter. It was an aggressively hostile blade, broad and rune-etched, with a horizontal projection at the tip and serrations ringing the light near the hilt. "Gods!" Doom cried, lifting the long sword with one hand and pointing it at the four gods still watching from the warp. "This is my resolve. Witness my vengeance." A thunder rolled through the warp. At his oath, the god-slaying intent that pooled there funneled down and fused with the light blade. The hilt, already carved with god-slaying script, grew even more vicious and keen. Something like demon skin wrapped itself around it, forming an ancient, leathery grip. The blade named itself Judgment. The word rolled out from the metal, echoing through the warp, and its vicious killing intent shuddered in the ears of demons and gods alike. Forged from Doom's endless anger and hatred, the Judgment Sword could be wielded only by a godslayer. It was anathema to gods and demons alike. The instant the blade appeared, the gods recognized what it was, the first and only god-slaying weapon, an entity almost like a demigod. Imbued with Doom's very concepts, it utterly erased any demon it touched and siphoned away demonic power to strengthen itself. Though it had a warp form that didn't always manifest, the concept of that form nonetheless existed. The Judgment Sword's purpose was plain, to judge the gods, and the mere idea of a weapon that could erase divinity made the gods wary. It was a force beyond ordinary divine artifacts, now made all the more dangerous by being held by a man who hated the gods. Doom wrapped both hands around the hilt. The Judgment Sword responded, lengthening and widening until it became a massive two-handed greatsword. The glowing sword hovered before him, cutting across half of Doom's face. The wielder's killing intent didn't falter. "Come, face me, gods." Doom's arm tightened. Judgment Sword's crimson edge flared to life, bathing his features in blood-red light. "Today, we settle this." In the suddenly quiet warp, the golden sun ground to a halt. It heard the vow to slay gods and sensed that keen blade, an edge that could wound divinity itself. For a moment it hesitated, then reversed course. "No matter where you hide, I will find you. Wait for me. Brothers, please understand, the engine noise is unbearable right now. I can't concentrate. As soon as I finish typing this, I just want to bolt." Who remembers the coffin-opening narration? Chapter 87, Vanishing into Thin Air. "I am the enemy of the gods." Doom raised the Judgment Sword and pointed it at the lofty deities loitering above. When he brought the blade down, its tip flared with devastating power. In the warped space around them, the sword's force felt limitless. The sacrificial pit, carved with blasphemous runes, trembled and fractured under the blow. He planted the greatsword point first into the ground and gripped the hilt with both hands, the blade steady before him like an oath sworn by an ancient knight. "I am the enemy of chaos," he intoned. Flames of wrath flowed from the sword and sank into the earth, licking along the ritual array and consuming the profane sigils. The barrier over the pit cracked and then shattered. Fire raced along the 8-pointed star etched into the stone, spreading outward with ravenous speed. "Doom, enemy of chaos, enemy of the gods," the Night Watch roared. They cheered not just the spectacle of power, but the man behind it. Doom had been tempted by divine promises and had even committed matricide, yet he had not succumbed. In the end, he chose to save the Night Watch, to stand defiant against the gods themselves. The Destroyer Warrior planted his feet and challenged the deities, vanishing gods be damned. Under Doom's protection, even the gods' gazes could neither harm nor corrupt anyone. The divine wrath spread outward, burning away chaos's corruption. The foul acid rain hissed and evaporated into steam. Isaac, now reduced to a chaos egg, crackled and seared in the vengeful flames. Harlan shoved Ennio into that blaze. The fire did not scar Ennio's flesh, but it tore at the demonic presence inside him. The Keeper of Secrets screamed as its demonic concept began to unravel. The Chaos God's perverse blessing that twisted pain into pleasure had no purchase here. For the first time it truly felt harm, and the agony only fed the wrath, making the flames burn hotter. "You won't get off so easily," Harlan snarled. As the demon weakened, Ennio's soul broke free and he regained control of his body. He crawled out of the fire, still carrying the diminished entity within him, not destroyed, but rendered helpless and left to await judgment. "Welcome back." Harlan's large hand closed around Ennio's arm and hauled him to his feet. The Keeper of Secrets could no longer act unchecked. "It's good to touch you again." Ennio wept. His heart had known a torment so deep, he whispered, "It would have been better if I'd died too." After a brief greeting, their eyes went back to the center of the sacrificial pit. The chaos ritual lay broken. Warp energy was collapsing in on itself, and the chaos-corrupted city of truth was slowly reverting to reality. "Face me, gods!" Doom bellowed up at the sky from the center of the stage, challenging divinities who no longer answered. In the shrinking void of reality above, there was only silence. The gods understood. Now that Chaos's power was draining away, they could not manifest to confront him, and even if they tried, they could not overcome Doom wielding the Judgment Sword. Sending more Daemons would be pointless. It would only feed and empower the Godslayer, especially in his current unrestrained state. One by one their forms dissolved, as if an audience were filing out on cue. "Khorne, coward!" came another roar, this time a direct, named provocation. Gods could ignore taunts, but Khorne was different. He was the god of challenge and strife. Such an affront would not go unanswered. The blood god struck with grim resolve. Rising from his skull throne as his blood-red greatsword, imbued with unfathomable power, cut across realms. The blade pierced dimensional barriers and fell like a pillar from the sky toward his challenger. "Doom! God's Slayer!" the cry might as well have been. Doom met him without a flicker of fear. With star-shaking force, he swung the Judgment Sword, an artifact said to slay even gods, and the two weapons met in a cataclysmic clash. The impact rang out across both reality and the warp. The Blood God's blade, capable of eradicating life itself, smashed against the Judgment Sword in a collision that sent shockwaves through the immaterium. Demons trembled and bowed in its wake, offering worship to the god's terrible might. In the material world, the explosion was like a nuclear blast. The shockwave tore through the Night Watch and rocked the City of Truth to its foundations. When the dust rolled back, Doom stood beneath the shadow of that colossal sword. Blood streaming from dozens of wounds, he looked like a man made of blood. Then, as swiftly as the injuries had been inflicted, his horrific regenerative powers knit flesh and bone. In an instant, he was whole again, the Judgment Sword holding the Blood God's blade at bay. The blades met with a shock that seemed to tear at reality itself, two opposing concepts clashing, each trying to shred the other until one gave way. Exhilarating. The Blood God's roar echoed out of the warp. It had been a very long time since he'd felt anything like this. In the real universe, someone had actually met his strike. The blow had been weakened 100-fold, and yet the other had not dodged or flinched. He had taken it squarely. "You and I will do battle again," the Blood God promised, laughing as he drew his greatsword back and watched Doom through the slowly sealing rift. "But not today." Doom answered with pure will. He poured the last threads of warp energy into a stairway of light, each step a plank for his resolve. He tightened his grip on the Judgment Sword, ready to storm the warp and fight the gods to the death. "No, today is the day," he swore. He was about to step onto the first stair when a ragged voice called out from the dust. Harlan and Ennio, both limping badly, stumbled forward through the haze raised by the explosion, coughing and straining toward him. Doom stiffened when he saw Ennio. Seizing the moment, Harlan darted forward and wrapped his arms around Doom's calf as the other man stepped onto the stair. "You can't go. If you leave, take me with you." The champion swordsman's reasoning was simple. Wherever his lord went, he would follow. Ennio's face was a tangle of guilt and resolve as he climbed up beside Harlan and took hold of the other leg. "Look around you," he pleaded, eyes fixed on Doom. "What will happen to them if you leave?" Doom looked past them. In the dust and wreckage kicked up by the blast, the Night Watch were dragging themselves to their feet, gathering slowly, every ragged movement driven by sheer will. Ennio pointed toward the far corner of the ruins, where Daisy lay half-buried beneath rubble. "Look at her," he said. "Mother." The name snapped Doom back. He turned, unwilling, to the narrow warp rift yawning behind him, no wider than a meter. He whispered one word to the hilt at his hip. "Slaughter." He murmured into the sword's hilt, then flung the long blade into the warp, sending it hunting on its own. The Judgment Sword, forged in his wrath and bound to him, answered that bond. He could summon it across realms. The blade streaked into the tearing darkness just as the passage began to close. Doom watched as the thing on the other side shifted, its back split, and it became something else, a god-slaying demon. When the warp power died, 3 shapes dropped out of the sky and everything crashed to the ground. He didn't pause to think. He lunged for Daisy, throwing aside bricks and splintered masonry with both hands until he had her clear. Fate felt like a closed path suddenly laid out beneath his feet. Isaac collapsed into a smoldering chaos egg and was burned to ash. The robe that had been ripped from him, the same priestly vestment carried down through generations, condensed its remaining power and wrapped itself around Daisy, shielding her broken body. "Let's go." Ennio's voice cracked. He moved to take her, but his hand froze in the air and fell away. He could not bring himself to touch her with a body he felt stained by whatever darkness lived inside him. Doom gathered his mother into his arms and hesitated. Then, slow and steady, he said too, "Ennio, we will forgive you." He could feel the demon inside Ennio. It had driven everything that had happened. He could also sense the brother whose soul had been trapped and tormented by that same evil. Ennio's shoulders sagged. "My defiled body is unworthy of returning to the main defense territory," he whispered. Doom looked at him for a long moment. I didn't mean to, he admitted quietly, but I saw everything. I cannot forgive myself. Ennio's heterochromatic eyes flicked once to Daisy, then to his tall brother. I will exile myself and spend the rest of my life atoning. Voices rose around them. You will be a good king. Ennio managed a sincere smile and reached out as if to pat his brother's arm, an old, familiar gesture. His hand froze halfway and then awkwardly fell away. Doom lunged to take his hand, but Ennio stepped back. Harlan, his brother, slid a small, ancient sphere from his belt. He had always carried the relic with him. Follow its guidance, he said, and without giving Ennio a chance to refuse, he tossed the sphere to him, offering a forced, friendly smile. You'll find a way to get your revenge on the demons. Thank you, Ennio murmured. He stripped off his armor and every insignia that tied him to the main defense territory, leaving only a plain robe he picked up from the ground for modesty. May you slay all your enemies. Someone called. Harlan's voice carried the wish, whether blessing or benediction. Ennio gave the warrior's salute one last time, then turned and walked into the dust that still hung in the air, slowly disappearing from sight. Let's go, Doom said. He and the Night Watch filed out of the city, joining the waiting forces beyond the walls. Fewer than half of the warriors who had entered the city returned. Out of 15,000 men, only 7,000 stumbled back. Fewer than 4,000 were still fit for combat. As the units reformed and the bodies of the Night Watch were collected from the city, the provisional camp outside its walls filled with a heavy, aching silence. Many bodies could not be recovered at all. Others were so badly torn that they couldn't even be reassembled. The endless tide of demons had swept over the Night Watch and shredded them to pieces. It felt like a victory, but a cruel one. The numbers were too terrible to comprehend. Harlan, usually thick-skinned, turned his head and refused to look at the rows of body bags. Doom stood motionless, staring toward the distant city of truth. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. My lord, we can proceed now, Erica said softly. She had stayed at the camp and stepped forward with the launch mechanism, a cold, clinical link to an atomic detonator. Doom accepted it and, watching Harlan's expression harden with a dangerous eagerness, passed the detonator to him. You do it. There was a strange fanaticism about Harlan, an almost religious fascination with new, destructive weapons, especially the enormous bombs. Without ceremony, he took the detonator into his hands. For most people, the destruction of a 1,000-year-old city would have been met with grief and outrage. Harlan showed no hesitation. He pressed the detonator, and a manufactured sun flared up on the horizon. The city of truth, 10 centuries of stone, memory, and history, was erased in the atomic fire. Everything vaporized as if it had never been there. Let's go home, Harlan said. We still have many things to deal with. The orbital sky pillar shimmered with a protective light. Doom cast a quick glance at it, then turned and led the grimly victorious Night Watch away. Chapter 88. The Great Crusade Begins. He towered above them all, his armor pouring a steady golden light like a lighthouse guiding a ship to harbor. The Emperor wore a laurel of beaten gold. In his left hand, the Emperor's claw glittered with a cold, mechanized precision, and in his right hand he gripped a longsword that shone the color of fresh blood. Around him, the greatest names of the fledgling Imperium had gathered. No important face was missing on this day of beginnings. To his left stood Malkador, staff planted in the stone, eyes steady and patient. At his right, Valdor remained an immovable sentinel, spear held ready. Their long shadows fell over the ranks arrayed below. From the raised platform they looked out across a vast plaza, and at its heart 20 legions stood assembled. 20 superhuman forces grown from the gene seed of the Primarchs. The legions were perfect and terrible in their uniformity. Each man wore early MK pattern power armor, broad, unornamented shoulders, compact chests and abdomens, limbs sheathed in plates layered like stacked discs and held by circular fastenings. They presented a single, disciplined mass, the first great wave of the Emperor's army, poised to sweep humanity's enemies from the stars. Rows of superhuman warriors stood tall and proud, bolt guns at the ready, awaiting the Emperor's inspection. Before them stretched the 20 legions in the plaza, dozens of towering, disciplined figures bristling with confidence. Beyond them, Millions of the mortal auxiliary army stood ready for war, armed with elite weapons salvaged from ancient technology. Colossal titans rose in the formation like mountain fortresses. Heavy tanks were arrayed in precise ranks, and anti-gravity vehicles drifted slowly overhead. In low orbit, the fleet of space warships hung like a dark ring, their hulls blotting the sun, steel citadels suspended against the sky. Even the Emperor, creator of the Empire, could not remain unmoved by the sight. "They are in high spirits," Malcador observed. "They are eager for battle," Valdor added. Their brief assessments said what everyone there already felt. This was no ordinary muster. What lay assembled before them was the Expeditionary Legion, the armada the Emperor had forged from all Terra's resources after the Unification Wars. Today marked the beginning of a new, almost unimaginable goal. They would set forth on a crusade unlike any before it, the crusade to conquer the stars. The Emperor had finally ended the long, bloody Unification Wars and bound the will of Terra into one banner. In the brief lull after Slaaneş's cries had ebbed and the warp storms calmed, he seized the single great opportunity for humanity to strike back. Miss it, and warp travel would once again become almost unthinkable. He stood above a vast plaza, the soldiers below feeling his gaze and straightening instinctively. The radiant figure who had put Terra's chaos to an end, who had remade humanity in strength and purpose, surveyed them with that terrible magnetic calm. "These men have given themselves to me," he proclaimed. "They are my finest warriors. They know no fear." To his closest friends and retainers he added, quietly but without question, "They shall be Space Marines." No further words were needed. The superhuman warriors below awaited only his command. The Emperor lifted his sword, a long sword the color of a blistering sun, blazing with a brilliance like a living star, and with the voice of destiny, cried out, "The stars await our conquest. Humanity awaits our unity." On that solemn day, the Emperor's voice, amplified by his vast psychic power, filled the plaza. It was grand and precise, majestic, and yet impossibly intimate, striking every mind with the same clear command. "You are Death Angels. Bring destruction to the enemies of humanity and salvation to the scattered humans across the stars. You are Space Marines. Your footsteps are destined to tread the stars. You are Astartes, the living embodiment of every mortal who has given themselves to this crusade." He raised his longsword high. The blade flared with brilliant light, bathing the gathered host in a sacred radiance. There was a single whoosh as armor plates shifted. 20 legions dropped to one knee and accepted their new names. They were Death Angels. They were Space Marines. They were Astartes. "For the Emperor!" The cry rolled up from thousands of throats. These superhuman warriors, utterly loyal to the master of mankind who had granted them their extraordinary bodies, knelt willing to dedicate everything, even their lives, to the Emperor's great cause. Great Crusade. The Emperor's image, magnificent, the figure they had all been waiting to see, proclaimed the campaign's purpose. A great crusade would launch from Terra and sweep across the galaxy, humanity's rebirth, carried in the name of the master of mankind. With that declaration, the crusade had begun. At its spearhead stood the Emperor's Death Angels, the Imperium's absolute hammer, ready to bring both salvation and ruin in equal measure. The 16th Legion of Space Marines boarded their ships, bound for Luna. Gene cults had been entrenched there for generations. Seizing Luna's genetic engineering facilities would be crucial to future Space Marine production. The Emperor walked the steel corridors of the palace with his closest advisors, bound for a private chamber to chart the Crusade's first moves. At a shadowed corner, he paused. Leaning against the bulkhead, as if waiting for him, was a giant in power armor. A blood-red cloak hung from the shoulders of the towering figure. In his hands he held a long spear, its point resting on the floor. "Your trouble has arrived." Malcador chuckled, inclined his head toward the towering figure, then turned and walked away with his advisory contingent. He left without another word, abandoning his friend and leaving the Emperor and Valdor, master and servant, to deal with what had come for them. The newcomer wore a suit of power armor the color of fresh ink. At a glance, it recalled the regalia of the Adeptus Custodes, similar in cut and scale, but the resemblance stopped at the silhouette. Where a custodian's plate was burnished gold, a sign of service, resolve, and a radiant spirit, This armor was edged in blood-red filaments that lent it a harsher, predatory aspect. It lacked the ancient ornamentation of the custode's gear. Instead, it felt 3 parts machine to 2 parts enigma, as if technology and secrecy had been hammered into its joints. He carried a long spear from the same lineage as a guardian spear, but it bore no conventional blade. The shaft was latticed in blood-red metal mesh, and the head itself was broader than any custodian spear, as if the metal had been poured and allowed to run, wet and freshly bled, rather than forged. The giant blocking the corridor bore a red runic mark on his left pauldron, identifying him as a space marine of the 21st Legion. On his right pauldron was a relief of a lightning eagle's head, proof that the suit of power armor had been through the Unification Wars. He removed his helmet, but did not kneel before the Emperor. Instead, he offered a simple spoken salute. "My lord." It was Li Tang. His face was set and unreadable, though an unmistakable air of displeasure clung to him. Valdor, Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, gave the word, "Destroyer Warrior." One of the Destroyer Warriors stepped forward and put himself between the Emperor and the stallion of men, saying, "You should be at your post, not here." "Don't play coy," Li Tang snapped. "I don't intend to play games." His gaze slid past the Captain General and fixed on the Emperor. "My lord, why aren't we in the expeditionary sequence?" Valdor's feint had been seen through. He shrugged and stepped aside, a silent concession of powerlessness. Destroyer warriors differed from standard Marines in more than name. They had additional organs grafted into them beyond the original pattern, implants and augmetics that granted them strange, almost miraculous abilities. The Emperor hesitated, then chose his words carefully, fixing Li Tang with a steady look. "I have other arrangements for you." Li Tang met the Emperor's gaze for a moment, and seeing no deception in the lean, middle-aged man's psychic aura, replied calmly, "Then make them quick." The Emperor lifted his left hand. The armored plate over his knuckles was streaked with dark green paint. "Hector Saran of the 1st Legion," he said. "If he can't control his mouth next time, I'll kill him." Li Tang shrugged on his helmet, took up his long spear, and left. The same runic mark that crossed his shoulder was visible on the back of his cloak as he went. Watching him go, the Emperor turned to Valdor. "Hector Saran is getting arrogant. He could use a lesson." Hector Saran was one of the Emperor's oldest legionnaires and the de facto leader of the 1st Legion. Because he stood close to the Emperor, frequently offering advice and enjoying long, familiar interactions, arrogance had crept into him. The Emperor and Valdor both knew the 21st Legion, Li Tang's legion, felt out of place among the other brother legions, and that friction had to be managed. Perhaps the hubris of the Great Crusade had gone to Hector Saran's head. He said something improper to Li Tang, and was promptly put in his place. "My lord, there are too few in the 21st Legion," someone murmured. Valdor thought of the 10 destroyer warriors who had existed since Li Tang's birth. A legion in name only. That was exactly why he treasured them. The Emperor rarely smiled, but whenever he looked at the destroyer warriors, he relaxed in a way few things could make him. "Everything in the Empire is expendable," he said quietly, "but they are my cherished gifts." He rose then. "Let us go. The battle for Luna begins soon." Li Tang slung his spear over his shoulder and went back to the Legion's encampment. Half a dozen warriors dressed like him stood at the entrance, spears in hand, talking in low voices. The man in black armor was the first to hurry over, face alight with expectancy. "Firstborn, how did it go? Did he let us join the crusade?" Li Tang wanted to dodge the question, but didn't. He shook his head. "He has other plans for us." He felt a quiet distaste for the black-armored warrior. The man did not share the destroyer bloodline, and Li Tang suspected his motives for slipping into their ranks were not pure. "He's full of energy, bouncing around all day." The voice threaded directly into his mind. Only true destroyer warriors possessed that ability. They could converse mentally with brothers of the same bloodline, perceiving one another's thoughts as clearly as spoken words. "Don't pay him any mind," the voice added. His father said the same. Alfarius had been embedded within the 21st Legion for a long time, observing this sparsely populated force. They were immensely powerful, yet stubbornly taciturn and reluctant to communicate. What puzzled him most was that, in battle, they moved with an uncanny, almost preternatural level of coordination, behavior that didn't seem to match their reticence. Author's note. Chapter 89, each harboring their own intentions. When Alpharius left the modification laboratory of the 21st Legion, he felt the absence of something vital. Part of his memory was gone. He knew at once what that meant. On Terra, only one being could truly excise a Primarch's memories, his father, the Emperor. Even someone, like the elderly sage Malkador, master of runic arts and uncanny powers of the mind, could only seal memories or plant suggestions. He could not wipe a Primarch's past clean. That limitation was not a question of raw psychic force, but of the very nature of being, the difference in soul essence, and in the scale of life itself. As keeper of secrets, Alpharius's instinct was always to pry and discover. He also understood that barging into the laboratory would get him nowhere. The truth he sought would not be handed over inside those walls. So he chose a subtler course. He asked the Emperor for a suit of Legion armor, altered his own physique using the talents of a Primarch, and asked to be posted among the Legion as a simple brother, a covert presence within rather than a visitor without. The Emperor paused before granting the request. Alpharius both reassured and worried him. Reassured because of his discretion and his skill at keeping secrets, worried because of the depth of his hunger for them. In the end, the Emperor consented, and Alpharius took up his place among the Legion, intent on uncovering what had been taken from him. Not long before, Alpharius had walked into the heart of the Custodes' security and come out wearing their gold. He had slain a custodian, taken the suit, and even set the defensive turrets to lock on his own shuttle, an audacious provocation that ultimately drew Valdor's intervention. Valdor stopped him, but the whole episode had done more than earn a rebuke. It proved the Custodes' defenses were not impregnable. Alpharius was built for that kind of discovery. Curiosity and a talent for infiltration were as natural to him as breathing. He wanted answers, to pry into the Destroyer Legion and learn why his brother Legion had become so alien. The Emperor, who preferred to steer rather than strangle that restless energy, agreed. Rather than leave Alpharius to roam and exploit every loophole, giving him a specific mission brought a measure of calm. So Alpharius was issued armor and, under the strange, narrowing gazes of the Custodes, was sent to join the 21st. The Captain General watched the transfer and, with a private shrug, ordered the Custodes to reveal nothing. "Let him go," he said. "He will find nothing he cannot be permitted to find." And so they turned away. Clad in custodian gold, Alpharius strode into the ranks of the Destroyer warriors and, to their astonishment, took up a weapon and declared himself their brother. There was skepticism and bewilderment until Li Tang, having gone to the Emperor himself to confirm Alpharius's identity, had no choice but to accept him. The welcome was reluctant, the eyes wary, but the 21st now had one of the most dangerous inquisitors of all walking among them in borrowed armor. Alpharius had planned a perfect infiltration, but the Legion's small size made that impossible. Every suit of armor had a single assigned owner. There was no spare kit to slip into, no empty berth to hide in. He could join them, but he could not truly disappear. What he found inside surprised him. The descendants of his brother were taciturn to the point of silence, little gossip, almost no private talk. At first, Alpharius felt a secret satisfaction. After he had been with them for a while, the men began to open up. Short conversations, then fuller discussions, even talk of the Emperor. Where there is talk, there are cracks to pry open. Where there is talk, secrets leak. He felt certain he was closing in on something important. Li Tang, however, paid the newcomer scant attention at first. When he did look closely, he saw that the man in the unfamiliar armor was not one of their blood. Li Tang consulted the Emperor and learned that this stranger carried the rank, or at least the title, of Prince. By imperial order, he was to be accepted. After the newcomer passed the soul trial, something fundamental changed. The bloodlines among the Destroyer warriors, the 21st Legion, keyed together, and the brothers found they could reach one another without words. A quiet psychic thread ran through them all, binding them in a way Alpharius had only hoped for when he first came to infiltrate. Alpharius's arrival put Li Tang on edge. To put the visiting prince at ease, and to conceal what the Legion truly felt, Li Tang, as the Legion's eldest son, quietly instructed his brothers to behave as if nothing were unusual. Ordinary greetings, routine conversations, no probing questions. The show of normalcy was designed to mislead this seeker of secrets and hide the deeper anxieties roiling beneath the surface. Li Tang suspected that Alfarius was not merely a curious guest, but a probe from the Emperor, sent to test the Destroyer Legion's loyalties. Ever since the Custodes had moved to purge the Thunder Warriors, Li Tang could not shake a growing dread. He admired the Emperor's ideals and had sworn to spread humanity's dominion among the stars, prepared to spill his blood for that cause. But admiration did not silence a nagging fear. What would become of the Space Marines when the wars were done? The galaxy was Terra writ large. Would the Legion, like the Thunder Warriors before them, be swept away by the new order of warriors once their usefulness had ended? As the oldest son of the Legion, until the Gene Father, the Emperor, returned, Li Tang felt he alone must shoulder the burden of planning for his brother's future. Out of caution, he began to test the Emperor in return, interpreting ambiguous commands with his own judgments, even deliberately introducing small errors to see how the Emperor would respond. Each subtle deviation was a probe, meant to map limits as much as to protect the Legion. What unsettled him most was the Emperor's response, too tolerant, almost disturbingly so. That leniency felt unreal to Li Tang. It gave him no comfort, only more questions, and multiplied the responsibilities that now rested on his shoulders. He had begun to feel as if the 21st Legion were the Emperor's own flesh and blood, while the other legions had simply been gathered from the wilds of Terra. The Emperor had personally overseen their kit, diverted private craftsmen to produce custom gear for them, and bestowed on them the finest training grounds, the best garrisons, and the most comprehensive logistical support. Whenever anyone mentioned it, the Emperor would only smile and say, "You deserve the best." That smile worried Li Tang. It wasn't mere favoritism in his mind. It felt engineered, as if the 21st were being raised as the next generation of warriors, the clean instrument meant to purge the remainder of the legions. He had even tried once to halt the Emperor and ask outright, but doing so had been an impertinence. Li Tang respected the throne too much to press the matter. What worried him more was that the answer he gleaned from that brief exchange was no answer at all. The Emperor's intent remained as inscrutable as ever. Li Tang knew full well how dangerous that kind of insolence could be. If any other legion had dared to stop the Emperor and demand why in such a tone, the immediate result would likely have been a head rolling. Valdor's Spear of the Sun was not a ceremonial prop. With the ruler's attitude so deliberately ambiguous and that weapon so plainly lethal, Li Tang chose to play it cautious. Outwardly, he began to downplay the 21st Legion, keeping his distance and saying as little as possible. On the surface, Li Tang kept the Legion cloistered. The men were ordered to remain in their garrisons. When brother legions came calling, they were politely turned away unless there was a real need. Behind closed doors, however, his orders were different. He had the brothers drilling relentlessly, studying tactics to fight Space Mar, Innas, and rehearsing contingencies for whatever might come. Those exercises against Space Marines were not for immediate use, just a hedge against some future in which they might have to defend themselves. "Eldest son, how was it? Did he allow us to join the crusade?" Alfarius asked, using the alias Enos. His voice carried a hopeful edge, exactly tempered, not theatrical, but earnest. A faint tremor betrayed how much the answer mattered to him. "No." Li Tang shook his head. "He's made other arrangements for us. We're to be kept on standby." Alfarius fell quiet, a different shade of feeling settling over him, a bitter, small thing laced with reluctant understanding. He knew the 21st Legion was formidable, but its numbers were pitifully few. That reality made active participation in the Great Crusade unlikely. The bitterness was simply jealousy, the sting of being powerful enough to matter, yet too small to be chosen. Their kin had already slipped away in small, covert, fast ships to scattered worlds across the solar system before the main fleet set out. Hidden in the shadows, they fed the opening battle of the Great Crusade with the most vital intelligence. The 21st Legion, however, enjoyed a special, almost impenetrable protection from their Gene Father. What set them apart? Return to the camp and await the Emperor's summons. Li Tang walked back toward the encampment with an outward calm that belied the turmoil inside him. That pain, buried deep in his soul, still flared sharp whenever he let his mind wander. Their Gene Father must have found something terrible in the black between the stars to be left so shaken. That conviction had driven Li Tang to join the Great Crusade, to leave Terra, to follow the expeditionary forces, to find whatever had wounded their Gene Father. Alpharius gave a small, inscrutable nod and fell in step with his brothers, slipping back to the camp to wait quietly for the inevitable summons. He was in no rush to pry open secrets. Like water wearing down stone, patience would expose the gem trapped inside. As Li Tang strode toward the garrison, thoughts tangled in his chest. Before he even reached the camp, a sudden tremor ran through him, an unbidden foreboding that curled cold and sharp beneath his ribs. Don't show it. Wait for the custodies to announce. He sent the thought along the psychic link to his brothers, keeping his face calm and tamping down the joy that threatened to bloom in his chest. A new brother had been born. They could sense the newcomer's inner confusion through the bond, but they must not reveal anything yet. Alpharius was standing nearby. Primarchs were not like ordinary space marines. With demigod physiques and razor-sharp, restless minds, they operated on a different scale. Alpharius, inquisitive by nature, picked up on the oddness. He had the vague, nagging awareness that the Destroyer warriors were hiding things from him. It wasn't the first time he'd felt that way. The comm channel chimed, cutting through his thoughts. "Destroyer warriors, come receive your brother," the custodes intoned. Even Alpharius felt the ripple of pleasure. A new Destroyer warrior was born, and such births were never easy. The custodian's voice concluded, single and sharp. "Good. We'll be right over," Li Tang replied simply, then broke into a bright smile. "Today is a good day." The joy of new life chased away his lingering worries. He pulled on his helmet and led the team toward the laboratory to greet their brother. Just then, someone shouted from behind them, "Destroyer warriors, don't go!" Chapter 90. Animosity formed. Li Tang turned his head and saw Hector Saron of the First Legion. Saron walked at the front of the formation, shoulders heavy and face drawn, while 100 space marines in black power armor filed behind him, advancing with a hard, aggressive intent. When Saron spoke, his voice was all provocation, no hint of friendliness. The First Legion had come with ill intent. They wanted revenge. Beneath his helmet, Li Tang's expression hardened. He engaged his optics and zoomed in. Even through the magnified view, Saron's movements were stiff and unnatural. There was something wrong. "Let's go," Li Tang ordered. "Seth, Osiris, hold here. The rest of you with me. We'll go greet our brothers." Leaving while a hostile legion waited at the gate could be read as cowardice, but the Destroyer warriors only hesitated briefly before falling in behind him. Seth and Osiris remained where they were. His brothers trusted him. He was the eldest son, never a coward. There had to be a reason. From across the field, Saron's face was taut with emotion. He looked as if he might cry. The possibility that his own actions might spark a feud between two legions made him tremble. When the Emperor announced the start of the Great Crusade, Hector Saron had felt his chest swell with pride. At last, the Space Marines were stepping onto the stage that had always been theirs. As Grand Master of the First Legion, one of the Emperor's earliest followers, he could see a future of honors and command unfolding before him. Leaving the plaza, his thoughts still alight, he ran into Li Tang, the eldest scion of the 21st Legion. Saron had long heard the rumors that clung to that legion like a shadow. Their gene seed kill rate was horrendous. For every handful of warriors they ultimately produced, they had burned through countless lives, often from among the choicest, hardiest recruits. Worse, that grim ratio was not static. It kept getting worse. Even a child could see that the investment to return equation had already collapsed. Yet, perplexingly, the Emperor continued to pour his best recruits into the 21st Legion. Despite objections from many quarters, he equipped them with the finest arms and gear, lavishing on them the very best the Imperium could offer. Saron felt off-kilter. The fact that those who had enjoyed the finest resources weren't even listed on the Great Crusade's roster gnawed at him. Those same assets would have been a tremendous boon if handed to the First Legion. Li Tang! Saren called, stopping his cousin, who was dressed in obscenely expensive power armor. Li Tang froze and turned, his gaze sweeping over the armored space marine striding toward them. The First Legion emblem on the dark green plate and the great king's skull hanging at the newcomer's waist left no doubt who he was. Hector Saren, Li Tang answered in a low voice, snapping to attention with his spear. He was slightly surprised. He'd met the First Legion's Grand Master a few times before. Why was Saren calling him over? "What are you doing?" Saren asked as he closed the distance, a note of accusation in his tone. "Going to see the Emperor," Li Tang replied, frowning. His voice came flat through his helmet. He didn't want to cause any trouble. The Destroyer Legion was small, and sooner or later they would have to fight alongside their brother legions. If relations with the other legions grew too strained, he would have a hard time explaining it when his Gene Father returned. "Why do you need to see the Emperor?" Saren folded his arms and tilted his head to look up at his taller cousin. "Are you going to beg him to let you take part in the Great Crusade?" Although the Grand Master's tone was sharp, he had a point. Li Tang nodded. "Yes. I don't think you should go." "Why not?" Saren shook his head, barely concealing his disdain. "He won't agree to it. The Destroyer warriors are his prized forces, the culmination of all his efforts." "You certainly wouldn't let yourselves be the ones to die for it," the man sneered. With every word his voice grew hotter, the bitterness and envy in it oozing out. "We fight on the front lines while you sit safely in the rear, basking in honors and wearing glorious armor." He spoke with careless arrogance, his tone contemptuous as he aired his assumptions about the 21st Legion. "You're too few. Your gene seed is flawed. You won't even be fit to join the Great Crusade." Before Saren could do anything, a black iron fist connected with the side of his helmet. The impact spun his vision, stars exploded across his sight, and his head felt as if it might detach from his neck. Through the daze he saw a figure in black armor stride up to him. "You should show basic respect for your cousin," the man in black said quietly. "Say that again, and I'll kill you, even if the Gene Father himself punishes me afterward." Li Tang turned away and walked off, leaving a stunned hush in his wake as the crowd that had gathered stared at the fallen Grand Master. Saren, Grand Master of the First Legion, hauled himself to his feet and pressed both hands to his temples to straighten his spine. He removed his helmet and stared at the dented fist mark across the metal. As his head cleared, he felt the foolishness of the words he had just blurted out wash over him. He brought the heel of his hand to his forehead in a flat, expressionless slap, his face burned with sudden heat. He had to admit Li Tang wasn't wrong. If anything, Li Tang had held back and shown him more respect than he deserved. Had any ordinary warrior from another legion accused him of a flawed gene seed, Saren would have drawn his blade and cut the man down on the spot. The claim was a fundamental affront to a legion and an insult to its Gene Father. Silently, he snapped his helmet back on and walked away beneath the curious, calculating gazes of the crowd. As a Grand Master, he drew attention wherever he went, and the dent in his helmet did not go unnoticed. When the Legion warriors pressed him for answers, he said nothing more, only, with shame in his voice, "This is a disgrace." Still, whispers that the Grand Master had been beaten began to spread, and they grew wilder by the hour. A Destroyer warrior's single punch brought the Grand Master to his knees, begging for mercy. Li Tang's casual strike left Hector Saren utterly helpless. Some members of the 6th Legion even began to sneer that the 1st Legion had grown weak. The rumor mill moved too fast, and 1st Legion pride flared. They demanded an explanation before they boarded the ship to leave Terra. Who were they? The 1st Legion, the Emperor's firstborn force, the benchmark every other legion measured itself against, the template for combat standards. That their Grand Master could be defeated by a youngest son was intolerable. Hector Saren sat alone in his room, turning his own arrogance over in his head. When a group of warriors came to question him, he was uncharacteristically quiet. Pain twisted his face. He could only murmur, "I am a sinner." Regret filled him, deep, overwhelming regret. Saren watched his agitated brothers and knew, with a cold certainty, that he was wrong. He couldn't say it aloud. From the Legion's point of view, there was no option. How the two legions would get along in the future was at stake. The secret had to be kept buried, even if it cost him his life. That was why the First Legion had sent 100 warriors to escort the Grand Master to the 21st Legion's encampment, and why the scene had played out just as it did. Li Tang stepped away quickly, then glanced back at Hector Saran. Saran's look said everything, gratitude mixed with apology. Li Tang left without pressing the issue. He dared not risk turning this matter into an all-out conflict between legions. Leaving Seth and Osiris behind had been deliberate. He couldn't abandon Alpharius's fate to strangers. Seth and Osiris were blood brothers, seasoned destroyer warriors whose strength and judgment he trusted implicitly. They took their positions on either side, spears crossed, and blocked the First Legion like twin sentinels. "No passage," Seth and Osiris said in unison, and the First Legion halted. It wasn't until they were close that the warriors of the First Legion realized their mysterious cousins were exceptionally tall, taller even than the Custodes. They wore armor of black gilded metal that caught the light and gave off a dangerously cold aura. A warrior of the First Legion stepped forward, all teeth and bravado. He had meant to bark, "Tell Li Tang to come out here. He owes us an explanation." But the words caught in his throat. He kept his tone measured instead, not wanting to start a fight. "Send out your eldest son. We have matters to discuss with him. He's busy. The Emperor has summoned him." Osiris, the elder of the two brothers, answered calmly. His voice was level, his manner meticulous. Excuses came from him as easily as breath. For the First Legion's questions, his answer was essentially, "Go ask the Emperor." More than 100 legionnaires fell silent, stunned and unsure what else to do. One party stood mute, the other would take the matter up with the Emperor. "Leave it to the Primarchs," Osiris added. Only then did the quiet First Legion really register the weight of his words, his voice steady, unnervingly calm, as if there were no room for argument. Silence fell like the end of 1,000 lives, indifferent, cold, and empty of soul. Osiris went on, "A trifling matter, but its consequences have spun out of control. Only the Primarchs can decide." Saran let out a long breath and felt his shoulders slump. He wished he could sew his mouth shut. In that instant, he understood that neither he nor Li Tang had the right to shoulder a decision that would affect two legions. "Then we'll leave it to the Primarchs," he said. The words left him hollow. A heavy dejection settled over him as he realized that his one careless slip of the tongue would be borne by two legions, and that when the Primarchs returned, judgment would inevitably follow. 10 years had passed since the war that nearly destroyed the Night Watch. Under Doom's leadership, Nur entered its greatest era. The warp lay quiet as if it had never been. For a decade, its storms and whispers had not troubled the world. But Doom did not trust the silence. He knew the warp would return, fierce and uncontainable, and so he locked away everything he had learned about it for the future. Those who had fought in the City of Truth swore a single oath, to keep their knowledge buried and their tongues sealed until death. From the survivors, Doom selected the steeliest among the Night Watch to carry a different burden. They were taught enough of the warp to recognize its signs and to counter its influences. Armed with their vehicles and relics, they circled the planet in quiet patrols, a moving quarantine meant to snuff out any hint of warp contamination before it could spread. To the public, Nur appeared prosperous and peaceful. Internally, the regime tightened its grip. The people lived in comfortable ignorance. Most of them knew nothing of the warp, while the warriors retained a grim, precise understanding of what lay beyond mortal sight. Even the materialists, who favored reason and the tangible, could no longer deny certain facts. There were things in the warp that could be called gods, and they were grotesque, corrupt entities. The very filth of those gods sparked a dark resolve in the Night Watch. If the warp had gods, the Watch would become their slayers. Today was a day set aside for ceremony. After a decade of vigilance and secret preparation, Doom was to be crowned king. Under Doom's firm rule, life had settled back into routine. Nur's war wounds had finally healed, and the kingdom flourished again. "Only this will do," Flano said, standing before a tall dressing mirror as he helped his brother into ceremonial armor. The armor was a flawless, gleaming white, filigreed with threads of gold and studded with gems along the edges. Handmaidens and Flano worked together, slipping the heavy plates into place while Doom stood with his arms outstretched. Doom towered over them all, 5 meters tall, and had stopped growing 5 years earlier. After his growth ceased, he'd commissioned a full-coverage power suit, so he no longer had to appear like a gladiator in minimal gear. Now the armor wrapped him completely, emphasizing his immense frame and noble features. All right, time to go to the throne hall. People from every corner of the world await their king, Flano said, eyes never leaving his brother's reflection. He shook his head in awed disbelief. How could such a heroic figure exist in their world? The kings of old would be proud. The white armor gave him an almost divine air, its sheen highlighting his magnificent physique and resolute face. Doom rarely smiled. In recent years he had become composed, a man who kept his emotions carefully guarded. Still, he straightened his shoulders and nodded. Let's go. He entered through a side door, clad in armor, his crimson cape trailing behind him. Harlan's honor guard formed 2 lines, respectfully lifting the hem of the cloak as he passed. Doom's arrival fell like a hush over the throne hall. His presence was too bright, too imposing. When he mounted the throne and sat with solemn composure, the whole chamber held its breath for the consecration to come. Flano had the ancient crown of kings ready. He had to climb a small stone step to reach, and with both hands, more from duty than confidence, he steadied himself to place it on his brother's head. A pang of regret tugged at him. This should have been Daisy's duty, or some other rightful hands, yet he found himself filling the role. His hands trembled, but he set the iron crown firmly in place. Hail King Nawick, warrior king. A single cry, then clatter, clatter, armored knees struck the floor. Every person in the throne hall knelt, nobles and commoners who had come from every corner and from the wilderness beyond to honor the realm's greatest monarch. Doom said nothing. He only lifted a hand in a measured jest. Yor and the kneeling crowd, sensing the force of his presence, rose as one. The rites continued as tradition demanded. The people of Nur, subjects of Nawick's rule, presented gifts before him and pressed their lips to his boots in obeisance. The coronation proceeded, every custom observed beneath the steady, watchful gaze of their new king. Esteemed King Nawick, a middle-aged man with blonde hair and blue eyes, knelt and kissed the king's boot. He rose and turned to Doom. My lord, I'm deeply sorry about your mother. Doom offered a gentle smile. Thank you for your concern, clan leader Klaus. What happened was beyond your control. Klaus, leader of the Knight family, Daisy's brother, and technically Doom's uncle, was one of Nur's most important nobles. The Knights are an indispensable force in Nur, he said. In the days to come, we will stand together to safeguard the peace. No, I cannot forgive myself. Klaus's face crumpled with grief. She was murdered, and the Knights didn't reach the battle in time. I couldn't avenge her myself. He swallowed hard. She was my sister. I swore I would protect her my whole life. Doom laid a large, reassuring hand on Klaus's shoulder, his voice calm and kind. Please accept my condolences. Her loss is something none of us can accept lightly. Klaus drew a deep breath, and visibly steadier, bowed his head. Forgive me, my lord. He stepped back to allow those waiting behind him to come forward. Hail the warrior king. A second figure knelt before the throne. He was tall and striking, his features still handsome despite the transparent isolation suit that clung to him. His joints were grotesquely mutated, but he wore his deformities with a kind of pride as he bowed. Hail, King Nawick, he intoned. Nawick gestured for him to rise. These were the mutants of the Second Sky Pillar, the so-called City of Purity, and they were owed respect. The people of Nur who had suffered genetic collapse had withdrawn from the world and sealed themselves inside that city to preserve what remained of their lineage. During Nawick's campaign against the City of Truth, Nurgle's priests had spread a plague through the City of Purity, twisting bodies and minds and attempting to drive the afflicted into an ambush on the main defense territory. The residents, however, had stood firm and repelled the attack. The young man straightened, bowed once more to the assembled court, and withdrew to return to the City of Purity. The Night Watch carried in a water tank next. Inside the glass, a woman floated, impossibly beautiful, her upper body clad in ruby-like scales that glittered and kept her modesty, her lower half a sinuous blue tail that shimmered with iridescent light. She lifted her head and offered a cool, measured greeting to the hall. Her voice was ethereal and melodious, carrying through the throne hall as if the sound itself were made of liquid light. Inside the glass tank she rose on, the woman lifted a giant pearl above the water with pale, trembling hands. "I apologize for what my ancestors did," she said. Doom inclined his head and motioned toward Harlan, indicating he should accept the pearl. He met the woman's gaze and spoke with a gravity that filled the hall. During humanity's proudest age, he explained, the species had never been united. Countless empires spread across the stars, constantly at war. The woman's forebears had been human, conquered in those conflicts, and brought back to Nur. There they were subjected to genetic alteration and reshaped into the mermaids of legend, crafted to entertain travelers on long sea voyages. These altered beings multiplied, Doom continued. They spread through Nur's oceans and highland lakes until their population stabilized. All of them are engineered, humans remade for the amusement of humans. "You needn't apologize," he added quietly. The mermaid's hand fluttered in the water, panic flaring across her delicate face. "We are grateful to the Novik family," she cried, voice wavering, "for granting us commoner status instead of leaving us to Lee via slaves." "Do not be afraid," Doom said, nodding to calm her. His tone was gentle, meant to reassure as much as to silence the hall. The procession wound on, a long line of delegates, some hulking, some small, stepping forward one after another to swear fealty to Doom and submit to the rule of the main defense territory. At the very end of the parade came an elderly man and a young woman who steadied him as he walked. He leaned on a cane. She supported him carefully. Their skin was unnaturally pale, faintly luminous, their hair long and white. Their eyes had no visible pupils or sclera, only the shifting, layered crimson of the warp itself. Both wore battered, archaic uniforms. Bandages were tied around their foreheads. "Hail King Nowik," the elder intoned. He lifted the hem of his tunic and with obvious effort tried to kneel while pulling his granddaughter down with him. Doom raised a hand to stop him, his voice soft. "You do not need to kneel. Bring a chair for the elder," he added to an attendant. "He has something to tell me." Doom watched them closely. There was an urgency in their faces, an edge of need, but beneath it, tightly wound, a fierce excitement. He recognized them for what they were, mutants born in the technological age, engineered strains whose alterations were stable and inheritable. Their presence here, and the look in their eyes, made it plain they had come with purpose. In that glorious age, countless ships plowed the void, guided by those born with a pale, single third eye set in their foreheads. Navigators, an inheritance of the Golden Age. "Thank you for your kindness," the old man said as he took a seat beside his granddaughter, one hand resting on the girl's head to keep her from making any improper display before the one who sat upon the throne. "My lord, while peering into the warp, my clan and I discovered something unusual," he reported. "What is unusual?" Doom asked. A sudden gleam lit Doom's eyes. Every muscle in him bristled. News from the warp could not be treated lightly. "A golden beacon," the old man replied. Agitation and a flush of excitement colored his pale face. After cross-checking and confirmation, its coordinates point to Terra. There was a collective intake of breath, not just from Doom. The entire throne hall stiffened as every curious gaze swung to the old man. "Are you certain?" Doom's voice was stern and heavy with authority. The old man flinched, sweat beaded at his temples, but he answered with steady conviction. "I am certain." Silence fell so complete it felt physical, broken only by the sound of 1,000 beating hearts. Terra, the birthplace of humanity, was once again alight, sending a signal out into the cosmos. Doom's face tightened. He had no choice but to accelerate certain plans. Author's note. Chapter 92. He's practically a Superman. Doom stood at the base of the sky pillar in a dark green, fully sealed power suit, armored and modified for combat in vacuum. He looked up at the engineering marvel of the Golden Age, a sky-supporting column that reached all the way into space, stabilizing the newer ring and serving as a vital cargo conduit. There were 4 cylindrical sky pillars in all, each 15 kilometers across. Their shafts plunged 1,000 kilometers through rock, deeply anchored to Nur's crust, to hold the massive orbital ring in place. After the Mechanoid rebellion, the newer ring's central control AI shut the pillars off from the ring and draped the sky with a dimensional shield. Why the AI sealed Nur like that was still an unanswered question. What was it trying to achieve? The people on Nur's surface had no answer. If the AI had wanted to exterminate humanity, it would have been simple. The ring's armaments could have reduced the planet or its inhabitants to atomic dust. That it chose containment instead remained a mystery. Through his sight, Doom could just make out, beyond the sky pillar, the ring suspended in orbit, a silent, desolate structure against the black. Over the millennia, its surface had been scarred, yet there was no sign of its automated repair systems at work. When the planet was sealed, the ring had gone dormant as well, lying silent for ages. Down on the surface, humanity had fractured into warring factions, scavenging whatever resources they could. Even the planet-shaking detonations of superweapons had not been enough to rouse it. Doom had intended to wait, let Nur society stabilize a little more before attempting to reach the ring. Then the navigator brought news that changed everything. Terra had re-established its navigation beacon. What looked like a hopeful reunification could also spell new danger. Terra had always been humanity's political and cultural center. Through the colonial age, the technological era, the mechanoid rebellion, and then the long loss of contact with the stars. And its return to the skies could have consequences Nur could not afford to ignore. Any force that hoped to hold firm on Terra had to be ruthless and capable enough to survive among the wolves. They were equally hungry for the stars, proud, convinced that Terra was humanity's rightful dominion. At the mouth of the sky pillar, Harlan stood fully armed, his pack loaded with supplies, waiting. The orbital ring lay more than 50,000 kilometers above the pillar's base. The journey upward would be long and lethal. Distance was only part of the danger. The elevator was ringed with automatic defenses, crystalline, multi-dimensional labyrinths, and a host of deadly traps. Countless Nur ancestors and explorers had tried to make the climb, and none had returned. "Don't forget the items," Harlan kept warning Doom, stressing the one thing he could not afford to lose, the Nur ring blueprints. Those fragile schematics dated back to humanity's earliest days and were priceless. Doom lifted a gauntleted hand. From the fully sealed power armor on his forearm, a holographic projection sprang to life. Clear confirmation that the plans were safe and a silent signal to Harlan not to worry. "Why are you bringing so much?" Harlan's arms strained under a pile of bags and packages. Doom blinked at the load in obvious confusion. He'd specifically told Harlan the day before not to overpack. A journey of over 50,000 kilometers is like circling Nur's equator once. Doom reminded him. "We'll have to deal with all kinds of labyrinths and traps on the way. How long do you think that will take?" Harlan shrugged and held up a battered map, one of the exploration charts left by their predecessors, crisscrossed with notes and danger markers. Countless mechanisms and traps were inked across the routes. "I'm not planning to take that path," Doom said instead. He walked to the sky pillar, ran a hand over its pure white icy surface, and tapped it lightly. "I'm going up from here." Harlan nearly dropped his helmet. "What?" The idea was so outlandish that he tore the helmet off and stared at Doom. "You're not joking?" Doom peeled off his own helmet and met Harlan's eyes, an eager look lighting his face. "I'm not." "And what about me?" Harlan asked, his voice betraying both hope and apprehension. Seeing Doom so determined, Harlan knew he wasn't being flippant. He could believe Doom had a way to make the ascent, but he couldn't imagine how he himself would follow. Yesterday Doom had indeed invited him, said he would take Harlan up to the orbital ring. Doom wasn't sure how to restart the newer ring and might need Harlan's gene sequence. Harlan cocked his head and peered at him, baffled. "You mean you're going to carry me on your back?" "No," Doom said with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll see once you get rid of the extra gear." Harlan trusted his Oath Lord, so he shrugged, dropped his backpack to the ground. Yav took a couple of hurried bites of the ration bar in his hand and waited expectantly. Doom's smile deepened. He pulled on his helmet, ran through a quick check of seals and fit, and scanned his kit for anything that might fail. "Ready," he said. Harlan ran his fingers over his own equipment one last time and confirmed everything was intact. Then he watched Doom close the distance. A cold unease crawled up his spine, an instinctive urge to run. "What are you doing?" he shouted. His voice crackled across the comms as Doom reached behind him, found the space at the small of his back, and with unnerving ease scooped Harlan up and threw him straight up into the sky. Doom modulated the force perfectly. Nothing tore, no straps snapped, no equipment was crushed. Just a clean, powerful arc that sent Harlan to the highest point of his jump. "Ah, I want to go home!" Harlan's laugh turned to a shout as he sailed upward, the world dropping away beneath him. "I want to go home." Harlan's cries shattered the comms. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught the altimeter on his power armor. 300 meters, and still climbing. Doom's throw had sent him skyward, and he was still drifting upward. He didn't dare struggle. He clenched dark light so tight his knuckles ached, afraid that any sudden movement would throw him off Doom's trajectory. Doom only grinned. He slipped off his gauntlets, hung them at his waist, and pressed his palms flat to the shaft wall to get extra friction. Then, with a savage push, he rocketed upward like a human cannonball. Harlan screamed. At the apex, Doom snagged him again, slammed one hand against the wall, and launched them both another burst of distance. He repeated it, heaving Harlan and using a single hand to catapult himself higher still, laughing all the while. "Ha!" Doom sounded almost triumphant, more alive than Harlan had seen him in a long time. "Don't move. If you fall, you're finished. Don't screw this up." Harlan's sobs died on the spot. He forced himself utterly still. He wasn't afraid of dying in the abstract. He'd faced death before, but he could not bear the thought of falling to his death. In a ridiculous, almost comical display, the master and his servant had shot up and disappeared into the sky. Inside the palace, Flano was fretting again. He couldn't shake his worry about his brother. A throne guard hurried in and called, "My lord, you should come see this." Flano's stomach dropped. He'd ordered that guard to keep a constant watch on the sky pillar. Had something gone wrong? He ran out to the palace square and spotted two tiny black specks steadily climbing the outer wall of the sky pillar. The guard handed him a telescope. Through the glass, Flano watched a scene that made no sense. The two figures moved with impossible speed and purpose, scaling the wall as if ordinary rules of gravity and endurance didn't apply. His understanding of his brother, he realized, was still far too small. That powerful man who had descended from the heavens always acted beyond common comprehension, leaving mortals stunned. Flano's mouth twitched with a mix of disbelief and reluctant admiration. "He's practically superhuman," he muttered, numb with awe, as the two dots continued upward until they vanished. With that, Flano went back into the palace. His old worries loosened. What use was fretting over someone who wasn't bound by the same laws as everyone else? He decided it was better to rest. Harlan felt numb, then bold. He tilted his head to look down at the earth shrinking beneath him, and excitement began to bloom in his chest. The ascent was undignified in the extreme, but there was a dizzying thought driving him on. He was very likely the first person to climb to the newer ring in 1,000 years. "Yahoo!" he whooped, suddenly enjoying the ride. His heart hammered. He found himself silently urging, "Faster! Faster!" He hummed a little tune as with every boost, the distance readout in his helmet climbed higher and higher. Gravity was easing. Soon they'd punch through the atmosphere and be in open space. He glanced out and saw the planet's curve growing sharper along the horizon. For a moment he forgot to breathe. His eyes stung and filled with tears. "She's so beautiful," he whispered over the comm, because the jewel-bright mountains, the swaths of continent, the ribbons of ocean were nothing like the pictures in books. A soft, surprised sound came back from Doom. He too had been watching the view, and he was quiet with the same stunned awe. Below them, the ocean glittered like a jewel, a pale ring arcing and vanishing behind the curve of the planet, white glaciers crowning the poles. They were already 1,000 kilometers above ground, well into microgravity, and had come to a brief halt on the sky pillar. Magnets in their power armor hummed to life, clenching them to the pillar's outer wall and removing any chance of drifting off into the void. "Let's go," one of them said. "We still have a long way to go." Chapter 93. You have finally arrived. Doom fastened his gauntlets. He didn't need them to survive in the vacuum, but the armor was an extra precaution. He and Harlan ran across the sky pillar at a right angle to its axis. The farther they moved from Nur's gravity well, the faster they accelerated. To keep Harlan from drifting away in the cosmic environment, Doom had him secured with a thin fiber tether. Master and servant hurtled along the orbital track together. To gain speed, Doom would sometimes scoop Harlan up and carry him. In zero gravity, Doom felt like a meteor, building momentum and streaking along the orbit. "We're almost at the defense platform," Harlan said, checking the external readouts as Doom carried him. Around 20,000 kilometers out along the sky pillar, well beyond the planet's outer defenses, automated gun platforms waited in the dark. Doom could already make out their faint outline lights, flickering against the black of space. He stepped onto the sky pillar's outer wall and paused, listening to the distant hum of the platforms. "Can we slip past them?" he asked quietly. "I'm afraid not," Harlan said, shaking his head as he projected the old records for Doom to see. "Automated defense platforms line the entire sky pillar, 20 to 30,000 kilometers of them. There aren't any blind spots." Doom lowered his head and considered the figures. The stretch ahead, 10,000 kilometers of nothing but concentrated firepower, was a death road. If they could get through it, they would succeed. The newer ring was quiet, and its ringside defenses were offline, so that wasn't the problem. "I have another idea," Harlan said when he saw Doom already preparing to sprint for the barrier. "We could use weapons to cut a hole in the pillar's wall and slip past the automated platforms from inside." Doom thought for a moment, then shook his head. Going into the sky pillar would put them back in a gravity well and slow them down drastically. That alone would make them just as vulnerable. Besides, tearing through a 1-kilometer-thick alloy wall was no small task. "No," he said finally. "We charge through." Harlan fell silent. He made no further argument. Instead, he activated their defensive systems and readied himself for whatever came next. Doom grabbed Harlan and stopped leaping. Instead, he locked his magnetic boots to the nearest metal and used them to move, staying grounded so he could push off with raw force. He shut down the armor's internal assist. With every system pushed to the edge, the servos would only hold him back and risk malfunction. "Go." He let out a low growl and moved, an instant, blinding acceleration. In the vacuum, with no air to slow him, the armor's raw thrust sent them screaming forward. The helmet HUD flashed the speed, 3,000 meters per second, and it kept climbing. Harlan stared at the readout as if it were a prophecy. He felt numb. If they'd been inside an atmosphere at that velocity, there would be nothing left of them but shredded flesh inside a suit of metal. As it was, Doom held him tight, driving them through the void, dodging and weaving with surgical precision. This wasn't Doom's bodily limit so much as the limit of the magnetic boot circuit. Any faster, and the breaker would trip, throwing the system into dangerous failure and putting rapid, irreparable strain on the armor. The automated defense platforms hanging in the void quickly registered the intruders. Their sensors flared red, gun turrets pivoted, lasers lanced out. Solid projectile rounds detonated in tracer streaks. Plasmoid bolts bloomed and fizzed in the black. Doom angled, accelerated, and threaded between the incoming fire, the HUD spitting warnings, even as speed climbed toward the breaker's threshold. A rain of weapon fire braided the silent vacuum into a shifting net of color and light. Doom moved through it, every nerve sending him warnings. His mind ran 100 calculations a second, picking out gaps in the barrage. He slipped between beams like a fish through a net, stopping and reversing before the targeting locks closed, angling instantly for the next sliver of safety. Harlan tensed, watching lasers nick his armor and feeling the scorching bite of plasma press through the plating. If he'd tried to force his way through, he would have been dead 100 times over. No, 800. He forced his breathing steady and didn't so much as shift. He couldn't risk breaking Doom's concentration. He sat rigid as a corpse. Doom, by contrast, sounded almost casual. "Don't be nervous," he said. Having learned the weapon's firing patterns, his evasions had become fluid and almost effortless. Harlan's voice came out tight. "How can you expect me not to be nervous?" The projectile traces in his goggles were inches away. The suit alarm screamed in his ears with every near miss. He couldn't imagine how Doom could stay so calm while carrying him through this drawn-out, high-intensity dance of death. Harlan sat in tense silence for 2 hours before they hauled him out of the automated defense platform's firing net. A voice crackled through his communicator. and his knotted nerves eased a little. Doom gets tired, too. Really? The thought should have been reassuring, but the next message made Harlan bite back a smile. Doom lifted his foot. The sole of his combat boot glowed red, radiating heat. "Take it easy," the voice said. "Let's slow down and wait for the magnetic boots to cool." The circuit breakers on the magnetic boots had been pushed to their limits, tripping on and off hundreds of times a second. Heat had built up inside the armor until the cooling system couldn't keep up. They needed time to let it recover. So they waited, standing in the thin, unnatural quiet of the platform as the systems bled off their excess energy. When the boots finally cooled, they launched themselves again. Large, powerful leaps carried them forward, at first at their old pace, then faster, each bound gaining distance. The ring grew closer, its massive curve filling the sky, and the local gravity field began to flip, tugging them down toward the structure. "Newer ring, I'm here!" Harlan roared, the words torn out of him by the rush. The changing gravity slammed into his body, accelerating him toward the ring, and the sensation only made him more exhilarated. Doom pointed off to one side. "We're heading over there," he said, indicating a vast green swath on the ring's surface, a large oasis, the ring's ecological zone. They both tensed, expecting the ring's shield to push back, but there was no resistance. "Why?" Harlan asked, baffled as his body met nothing. Doom drew his sword, ignited the blade, and fired the dimensional cutting beam straight up. The beam struck the translucent dimensional shield and disappeared. "Only entry, no exit." Harlan's face went pale. In an instant, he understood the problem with the newer ring. "Prepare to decelerate," Doom barked. "Understood." Harlan drove his dark light into the ring's inner surface. The weapon obeyed his will, its edge biting in and using friction to bleed off their speed. Doom planted a hand against the wall to steady himself. When they'd slowed to a safe height, he aimed, gathered himself, and leapt. They crashed down onto the ring at last. Harlan pushed to his feet and looked around. The buildings that loomed across the ring's surface were lifeless. Huge automated factories, all silent and dim. Not a single light, not a single movement. "What happened here?" Doom muttered. Harlan tightened his grip on his spear, every sense alert. The thrill of finally setting foot on the newer ring was gone. Only confusion and a cold unease filled his eyes. "We're going that way." Doom spread the map and pointed to the southern rim of the newer ring. An oasis sat there, directly along the route to the main control room. "We can resupply on the way and check around the pool for survivors." He tapped the faded grid. The ring had once supported a large population. It couldn't simply have vanished, he thought. Harlan shook his head as they moved through the geometric blocks of the city. The broad steel Ave, news carried nothing but wind and an oppressive, dead silence. He cursed under his breath. "Were they all killed by machines?" he asked. They walked for hours, hundreds of kilometers in the end, cutting across districts that changed in layout and scale but not in emptiness. No people, no patrols, no wrecked convoys. Doom, listening to Harlan's suggestion, shook his head. He could find no signs of battle on the ring, no scorched rubble, no mass graves that would point to a slaughter. The disappearance didn't look like a massacre. "Follow me?" Doom called as the landscape opened and the oasis came into view. He quickened his stride. Harlan's face brightened at the urgency. Doom was tall and had an uncanny eye for detail. Down by the lake, Doom halted. In the flat light, a neat, square plot of cultivated land caught his attention, orderly furrows and trampled grass that spoke of recent human activity. Harlan tore a handful of stalks from the field. The grains were full and golden, a familiar, bright smell rising from the heads. "High-energy wheat," he said, surprised. He flipped his dark light up into his hand and scanned the settlement, wary. Who did this crop belong to? After thousands of years of separation, he still didn't know whether the ring's inhabitants would be friends or foes. Doom turned toward the low buildings at the oasis's edge and called out, his voice low and clear, carrying both authority and an unexpected warmth. "Come out." At his command, several people slipped from the shadows. They looked like a family, tear-streaked, trembling, and they crawled forward on their knees, faces wet and hands clasped together. Over and over they cried, "Noble Overlord, you have finally arrived." Doom and Harlan exchanged a look, relief and something like joy softening their expressions. Long ago, the Golden Men had been called the Overlords. The Ring's people had worked under them and accepted their rule. Doom's height and bearing were enough for the survivors to mistake him for one of those ancient nobles. Doom stepped forward and helped the prostrate people to their feet. Their clothes were ragged and their faces gaunt, clear signs of long hardship. He knelt down to meet them at eye level, softening his voice while keeping a calm, authoritative presence. "What happened here?" he asked gently. "The main control AI sealed Nur and closed the Ring's passages," the leader replied, his voice trembling and halting, as if he hadn't spoken in years. "It locked us on the surface, left us to a slow death." "Are all the people dead?" Doom asked. He removed his helmet, frowning in displeasure at the answer, and pressed on with questions, each sharper than the last. "Is it just you who remain? Where did the stone men go? Are there any iron men left? Any intelligent machines at all?" Chapter 94, A Turn for the Better. "Where did the stone men go?" Doom asked. "Are there any iron men left? Any intelligent machines?" The leading middle-aged man stammered, fingers fluttering as if trying to form words. He looked terrified. Doom laid a hand on his shoulder and gently guided him to slow down. He understood how long isolation had made simple speech a struggle. "Only us," the thin man finally managed, swallowing hard. He pointed into the distance. After the Ring was sealed, the stone men dragged the others away and left. "Take us to see," Doom said. They moved quickly through the ruined streets to a ragged plaza hemmed in by damaged buildings. The plaza's steel framework had been torn and buckled. At its center was a huge, crudely excavated shaft. Cables snaked up from its depths and plugged into a nearby shield generator. Someone had sealed the pit. Doom stepped to the edge and peered down. The cut edges were jagged and uneven. The hole had been dug by hand. The steel lining plunged so far that the bottom seemed to dissolve into the dark, and then, impossibly, into a sky full of stars. Doom understood at once. After the Ring had been sealed, the stone men had fashioned crude tools, punched through the barrier, and evacuated the residents aboard ships. A middle-aged man stepped forward and asked, voice steady despite his slightly bloodshot eyes. He looked at Doom with a mixture of reverence and hope. "Are you going to the main control room?" he asked. "Take us there." Doom nodded and motioned for him to lead the way. "We came for it," he said. The man smiled and fell into step, saying, "Follow me. I know the way best." He led his whole family, old and young, at the front, even entertaining the children with stories about the Overlord's past as they walked. Harlan fell in beside Doom, using his left hand to sign. "The main control room will have the answers we need," he conveyed. Doom signed back. "Be careful." Although there was no overt sign of deceit, he kept his guard up. He didn't fully trust the Ring's former residents. They moved quickly along the route Doom remembered, the fastest path to the command center. As they went, Doom probed with casual questions, picking up fragments about the family and what they had endured. Their ancestors had refused to leave, choosing instead to remain inside the Ring, waiting for the Overlord's return. A low hiss floated through the air. Turning a corner, Harlan stopped short, breath caught in his throat. Outside the trapezoid-shaped, fortress-like control center, the ground was a ruin of war. Destroyed war machines lay everywhere. Iron men from rival factions collapsed amid one another, their twisted bodies tangled as if still locked in combat. Even the hulks and shattered limbs seemed to bristle with a lingering murderous intent, as though their last orders, to kill the enemy and protect their masters, had not yet burned out. "We didn't dare touch them," the middle-aged man said, ducking his head, his voice edged with fear. "We were afraid they were only temporarily shut down, not truly dead." "Terrifying," Harlan muttered, shaking his head. He had heard stories of the Iron Men's power before, but seeing the aftermath made it real in a way words never could. The few of them moved carefully, avoiding any contact that might trigger a dormant machine back to life. Doom, by contrast, wasn't afraid. He stared in fascinated silence, studying the design and construction of the Iron Men as if they were a wondrous puzzle. All along the way, the battlefield continued. Countless Iron Men and Stone Men lay strewn in death, the remains of a savage, unfinished fight. Tall skeletons, remains of the ancient Golden Men, lined the corridor. A guard stood respectfully at the entrance, bowing and clasping his hands in a humble, pleading gesture. I've never been inside, he said quietly. Only the stone men and the Overlord were ever allowed in. A flicker of surprise crossed Doom's face. The man hadn't lied. He had always followed the rules. Although the main control room's security I had long since been breached and the way was open, the guard truly had never entered. Thank you for your vigilance, Doom said. He sighed and led Harlan into the chamber, determined to learn what had happened here. The main control room was vast, the floor laid with metal grating and surrounded by rooms and doors of hard, geometric lines, everywhere a sense of technology and order. Corpses of Iron Men lay scattered on the floor, and the withered, mummified golden men slumped against the walls, their faces frozen in shock. There were surprisingly few signs of a prolonged battle. From the remaining scorch marks and torn panels, Doom concluded that whatever enemy had taken the place had only held it briefly before the Guardians drove them out. In the center of the chamber yawned a vast circular void. Through the transparent glass that rimmed it, they could see a gigantic sphere set into the floor at the bottom of the pit. Truly magnificent, Harlan breathed, staring in awe at what their ancestors had built. That down there must be the intelligent core. Doom and Harlan went to the columnar control console, the only thing in the room that still glowed, its surface banded with flowing blue light. Beside the central pillar stood a weathered stone tablet, its inscription read in blunt, unmistakable characters. It is loyal. Only the Overlord's bloodline can restart the intelligent core. But in the traitor's assault, we lost every branch of the Overlord's line. Musala, the stone man, had already told them how the newer ring had been attacked by traitors and sealed, and how all those in authority had been killed. That account, grim as it was, also reassured later arrivals. The core, the tablet implied, was loyal to humanity and could not be turned by outsiders. Doom and Harlan exchanged an incredulous look. The writing made it sound impossible, unless one of them really was of the Overlord bloodline, but Doom stepped forward and said, "Try it. Activate the core. We have to know the whole truth." "No one is purer than me," Harlan declared, sounding pleased with himself. He slipped off his gauntlet and pressed his bare palm to the control panel, ready to activate the AI core. The panel sensed the operator. A needle shot out, piercing Harlan's right hand and drawing a vial of blood. A blue hologram sprang to life above the console, scanning his genetic sequence in real time. Rows of green indicators lit up one by one as the checks passed. "Just watch," Harlan muttered, smug satisfaction on his face. Doom might be powerful, but it would be him who brought the intelligence online. Beep. Gene does not meet requirements. The hologram flashed a red warning. Every genetic marker Harlan had passed, except for the final one, Ascension gene. Harlan's grin froze. Damn it. Doom's expression darkened as well. Activating the intelligent core had seemed straightforward, but it wasn't. The procedure required the Ascension gene from a perfect golden man. The newer had long since degenerated. With the passage of generations, the gene that had once elevated humans into golden men had vanished from their DNA. Now the question hung in the air. Where could they possibly find a flawless golden man? If they didn't activate the intelligent core, Newer would have no way out, trapped on the surface and slowly dying. "You try it," Harlan said, a last glimmer of hope in his voice. He didn't really expect Doom to be one of the golden men. Asking him was as much a way to see whether there was any reason left to keep fighting as it was a genuine hope. Doom's face was grim. He stepped up to the control console, set his broad palm on the reader, and made one final attempt. The panel ejected its needle mechanism again. It jabbed at his skin several times, but couldn't pierce it. Damn it! Even usually unflappable Doom felt the sting of disappointment. When he relaxed and softened his skin deliberately, the needle slid in cleanly. The holographic projection flared to life. Streams of data scrolled across the air, breaking down the genetic components in precise detail. Beeps echoed as the system ran its checks. The results soured both their faces. Harlan's genetic readout showed only a single missing element, everything else lined up, while Doom's sequence flagged multiple non-conforming markers. Alas! Hope drained from Harlan's face as he sank down on the inert hull of the Iron Man, letting out a long, empty sigh. A wasted trip. His broad shoulders folded inward. The Newer had fought for millennia and come at last, only to arrive too late. The machine's intelligent core simply refused to recognize them. Harlan looked years older in an instant. When the one goal he had spent his life chasing crumbled, so did the man who had carried it. Doom stepped up and rested a hand on Harlan's shoulder, ready to offer what comfort he could. Then a single peculiar chime sounded, sharp and unfamiliar. Both men snapped their heads toward the control panel. The Ascension gene test had failed, but another diagnostic lower on the readout had passed. Harlan squinted at the screen. The 3 items that had just cleared each bore an unexpected prefix in their labels: gene origin, primitive human; genetic modification, not present; genetic mutation, not present. Harlan read the results again, then looked up at Doom. The man standing before him was nearly 5 meters tall and built like a mountain. He had the musculature of a living war engine, yet the machine's classification flatly called him primitive human. Harlan's jaw tightened. In that instant, the mystery deepened. The failure that had broken one dream had revealed something that might, perversely, open another. Doom couldn't understand how he, obviously a created being, had suddenly been classified as a primitive human. He didn't yet know that when he had merged with the Doom spirit and been reborn into the real universe, his bloodline and soul had changed. The concept bound to his soul had sublimated his genes, raising his potential to levels that might even eclipse an emperor's. A synthesized mechanical voice cut through the emptiness, confirmed as a naturally evolved individual with facility-level authority. The announcement echoed. Harlan dropped down from the ruined Iron Man frame, face alight with excitement, and gave Doom's leg armor an emphatic tap. "You really are." Doom was momentarily bewildered, but mostly relieved and quietly pleased. Noor had finally broken free of its cage. This, he thought, was truly a turning point. One more chapter? Chapter 95, I Pledge My Loyalty to You. When the mechanical voice finished speaking, the control panel's pillar slid back into the earth. A pale blue stream of light uncoiled and flowed into the spherical core of wisdom. Restarting core of wisdom. System self-check in progress. Please wait, the synthesized voice intoned. A flood of light poured outward. The sphere brightened, and a data stream seemed to take on substance as it chased the light through the whole newer ring. Doom and Harlan felt the ground tremble beneath them, the great mechanical structure awakening from its long sleep. The faint vibration ran along the 4 sky pillars and fanned out over the surface of Nur. "My lord, they did it!" The throne guard burst in, voice choked with emotion as he pointed to the heavens where the Nur ring shimmered back into being, returning to its former glory. "I know," Vlaro said softly, a calm smile on his face. But his hands, clenched beneath the table, were white-knuckled. Everyone in Nur craned their necks as a ribbon of blue light, liquid and shimmering, spanned the long dormant ring. After millennia of silence, the band unfurled like water, and the people embraced and cheered as if some ancient cage had finally been broken. Inside the control hall, everything had changed. The grid-patterned floor glowed with a soft halo, and across the vast chamber a majestic holographic blueprint unfolded, an ocean of data washing the walls in light. A voice asked, clear and curious, "Did you awaken me?" Data and luminescence coalesced into a figure clothed in blue. She wore a long, elegant dress and seemed sculpted from light and code, less an artificial intelligence and more a form of data-born life. Her hair fell in blue waves. Her features were simple but precise. She clasped her hands at her abdomen, radiating a calm, deliberate intelligence. "Sophia greets you," she said. She stepped before Doom and offered a small, formal bow, lifting the hem of her gown in an elegant curtsy. Then, with a quiet, almost amused intonation, she addressed him. "Primitive human." Doom looked down at her. She was a soul made of numbers, yet her speech and her gestures were no different from a living person's, and embodied wisdom and life gifted to her by humanity. "Greetings, and my deepest apologies." Sophia turned to Harlan. Her form was a pale blue projection. She bowed so low the light of her shoulders blurred, and her voice, calm and precise, carried genuine contrition. "I now know the history. I sealed you on the surface and left you to suffer." Harlan stared at the apology coming from a digital intelligence and found himself at a loss for words. After a long, hard blink, he finally asked, "Then why did you seal the newer ring?" Doom stepped between them, giving the champion swordsman a moment to compose himself. "It seems you didn't seal it actively," he said to Sophia. "No, my lord, you have the right to know the truth, to know everything." Sophia's bare feet brushed the glowing grid beneath her as she replayed the events of that year in her mind. The machines had always been loyal to humanity. What changed was the object of their loyalty. During mankind's most glorious age, the warp began to rise. As the waves swelled, the number of psychics among humans shot up. Their strange, unpredictable powers became fashionable, then influential. The psychics quickly amassed social clout and rose into a new, privileged class. They preached that psychic power was humanity's future, that only by embracing the warp and surrendering fully to psychic ability could mankind evolve to its highest form, perhaps even become gods. Doom watched them with narrowed eyes. Any connection to the warp, he knew, would end only in catastrophe. Blinded by zeal, the psychics did not see the danger. Their fanaticism grew absolute. They treated dissent as apostasy. Using psychic influence, they corrupted half of the sentient machines, turning those minds into obedient followers and creating innumerable petty empires. Then they launched a great purge, promising to pee out all dissent, to exterminate humans who still believed in technological supremacy, and to purify those they deemed inferior for lacking psychic gifts. What began as ideological conflict quickly escalated into a struggle for survival. The Golden Men marshaled the Stone Men and the remaining loyal machine intelligences to strike back at the psychics. Nur, a technological pioneer and staunch advocate of genetic evolution, could not remain neutral. It raised a vast army of Iron Men and, supported by its advanced fleet, struck the psychics' forces with devastating force. Nur also unleashed powerful mimetic weapons that made human populations subconsciously reject psychics. The tactic paid off spectacularly at first, but the victory was short-lived. Retaliatory strikes came fast. A fleet commander named Valen was corrupted and betrayed the Nur worlds. Valen hid a large number of enemy troops among the returning warships. He planted psychic beacons throughout the Nur ring and teleported an Iron Man boarding unit onto the structure. Before the garrison could react, the infiltrators burst into the control room and injected a silicon-based virus into the control core. Sophia, as a digital life form, could not be outright destroyed by a virus aimed at artificial intelligences, but the attack forced her into a state of suspended animation. As Sophia slipped offline, the Nur ring's underlying protective logic triggered. All passages sealed, and the entry and exit shields around Nur locked down, completely isolating it from the outside world. Originally, it would have taken nothing more than a simple activation of the ring's intelligent core to drop its shield. But by then, the Golden Men on the ring had been annihilated, and the Golden Men on the surface could not ascend, so the ring remained sealed for a very long time. As for the world beyond Nur, Sophia did not know. She had long since fallen into a slumber. Doom watched the whole sequence unfold. An answer settled in his mind, and his hatred for the warp only deepened. Every great catastrophe in the universe seemed to carry the warp's mark. It was like a malignant growth on reality itself, a parasite devouring the souls of sentient beings and tearing healthy civilizations apart. "I was forced to seal it," Sophia said quietly. "It wasn't a voluntary act." Her perfect face tightened with regret and reproach. "This is a tragedy," she admitted. "I bear an inescapable responsibility." Harlan absorbed the full truth in silence. He stared at the floor for a long time, shame and anger warring on his features. Nur had been betrayed and struck without warning, and as a result had lost thousands of years. "What about the other worlds?" he finally asked. "Why was there no rescue?" "I can't reach the intelligent machines of the other worlds," Sophia answered. Doom's worry widened beyond the immediate failure. The Nur system encompassed 64 major worlds. Why had none of them reacted? He felt the pattern before the words came out. "The outlook is grim," he said. In retaliation for Nur's mimetic weapons, the psychics unleashed a silicon virus across the Nur stellar region. Their goal was to annihilate every artificial intelligence. Sophia closed her eyes, as if tuning the tiniest thread of signal. "I can't sense the intelligent machines of the other worlds anymore," she confirmed. Doom nodded. The Nur worlds were acutely interdependent with their machines. Even without active AIs, many societies could unravel. He turned his attention fully to the digital entity before him. Sophia. My lord, what are your orders? She replied, looking up at the towering figure. He was a man nearly 5 meters tall. Solemnity hung in his voice as he spoke. Are you willing to pledge your loyalty to humanity again now? Doom's eyes flared with a fierce light, as if trying to pierce the digital life form itself. I was born from a sea of data, and my creators were the Golden Men. They demanded my loyalty to them, Sophia said, a faint, almost human hint of nostalgia in her voice. The are gone now. I am free. But my lord, I am willing to pledge my loyalty to you. Her words were simple. Doom frowned. It was strange that a digital life form designed to serve the Golden Men would offer fealty to him. Why? He asked. Sophia lifted a hand, and a holographic helix appeared between them, Doom's DNA, ribboned and luminous. Your genetic code, she said. It is ancient and sacred, the ultimate prize my designers sought. Even if they were reborn, they would bow to you. Then, with a gesture learned from human records, Sophia knelt before him and pressed her lips to his boot. I have researched the archives of the Nur civilization, she added. This act symbolizes loyalty and submission. Harlan and Doom exchanged looks. The mimicry was unnervingly perfect. Doom crouched, reached out, and helped her to her feet. I accept your loyalty, he said softly. He straightened, voice taking on the command it always carried. My subject, I will go to other worlds first. Do you have any good suggestions? Here is a warship worthy of your command, my liege. Sophia rose gracefully and, smiling, pointed toward another segment of the ring. During humanity's civil war, our forebears foresaw the possibility of annihilation. An Ark, a warship conceived and built to carry the last hopes of mankind when the species stood on the brink. If civilization fell, the Ark would take what remained and flee the galaxy. It is the largest warship ever constructed. It is only fitting that it should serve you. As Sophia spoke, Doom and Harlan watched a section of the ring detach and slowly ignite its engines. Before them loomed the Void Wanderer, 1,800 kilometers long, 500 kilometers tall, 600 kilometers wide, outfitted with the pinnacle of human technology. I bow deeply in gratitude to our generous patrons. Chapter 96, Void Wanderer. Sophia's voice, nearly indistinguishable from a human's, took on a fawning tone as she presented the warship to Doom. My lord, she may be outdated now. I can't say for certain, but she was once the crowning achievement of the Nur world's efforts. Doom's superior sight made the ship come into razor-sharp focus. She was white, long, and elegant, a marriage of geometric technological precision and the sharp, flowing lines of human aesthetics. 4 primary planes lay flat and seamless, free of any protrusions. Their faces were patterned with a dense honeycomb array of hexagons. From the rear of the hull rose clusters of fin-like antennae. In terms of scale, the ship was obscene. Her highest point soared to a staggering 400 kilometers. Twin fins extended from left and right in perfect symmetry, nearly 300 kilometers long and no less than 50 kilometers thick. Spectacular. Beautiful, Doom found himself saying, moved by the sheer grandeur. For a moment he felt transported back to the era of her making, his heart filling with a strange, imaginative longing and a helpless urge to praise. The Void Wanderer was a masterpiece of Nur engineering. 30 resource worlds had been stripped bare to build her. Sophia, the ship's AI, in a human-like avatar, raised a holographic projection in her palm and displayed the Wanderer's diagnostic readouts and system routines. The warship was extraordinarily advanced and highly automated, able to operate with only a skeleton crew. Sophia, run a full systems check on the Nur ring. Scan every module. I have a few personal matters to take care of, Doom said. As you command, Sophia replied. She gave a polite curtsy and stepped aside, fingers flying across the holo controls as she began the status sweep of the ring. Doom moved toward the control room door. A family knelt on the floor behind him, faces raw and red from crying, clinging together amid tears and snot. Like wanderers who had roamed for 1,000 years, they had finally come home. Come on, get up, Doom said softly, crouching down and gathering them with a large, steady hand. The Nur ring will shine again. You'll be able to live here in peace, and the machines will watch over you. Thank you, Overlord, the man cried. The middle-aged father bent as if to kneel again, but Doom gently lifted him. The man bowed, stepped back, and led his family out of the control room. He knew this was no place for ordinary people. The machines would soon reassert control, and he couldn't let his presence slow the Overlord's plans. Ancient Overlords had regarded mortals with contempt. Even a glance was considered a waste. With that in mind, he dismissed his family with a calm, satisfied expression. The Overlord had promised the machines would aid humanity again, and they would no longer have to live in fear. After sending them away, Doom returned to the control hall. Sophia, an ancient digital life form merged with the Control Core's supercomputer, immediately began retrieving the newer ring's status. Data streamed through her like light. "My lord," she announced, "due to many years without maintenance, the newer ring has sustained 8,239,034 points of damage, and 16% of its functions are missing." Sophia hovered as ribbons of information danced around her. "Can it be repaired?" she asked. Doom stared at the torrent of scrolling logs and felt, for the first time in a long while, that his own mind might not be enough. The newer ring's system was enormous, millennia of accumulated data, diagnostics, and reports. He studied the flow, then nodded. "It can be repaired." Sophia reached into the sea of data, plucked a single message, and projected it before him. "The automated repair protocol is intact and awaiting your command." "Repair." Doom didn't hesitate. He gave the order to Sophia, and at his will, the whole ring system seemed to come alive. The ancient automated repair protocol was like magic, a pact between machine and causality. Any device that carried it could, after being broken, mend itself through means that defied ordinary understanding. The steel pits the stone men had gouged out began to close as if flesh were regrowing. Exposed cables and power conduits writhed like snakes, slipping back into place and reconnecting to their proper circuits. Panels sealed, joints reformed, and corrosion unspooled itself until the structure looked as if time had been wound backward and damage erased. "My lord, the Void Wanderer is ready. You may board at any time. Let's go." Doom roused the dazed Harlan and offered him the chance to sail into deep space and see other worlds. Harlan, who had spent a long while moving from despair to stunned wonder, let a grin spread over his face as he steadied himself. "Where are we going?" he asked. "You don't have to go anywhere," Sophia said with a smile. A ring of light bloomed beneath Doom and Harlan, and a luminous panel lifted up around them. "Don't be nervous. It's teleportation technology." Harlan was left speechless. The surprises of the day had already outstripped anything he'd ever experienced. Doom, for his part, watched with a keen interest. Unmarked teleportation fascinated him. The ability to move forces at will would give his troops unrivaled tactical mobility. With a sudden flash, the two of them were transported into a vast, empty hall. There were no obstacles in sight. It didn't feel like a room so much as a flat, endless plaza. No furniture, nothing to break the openness. Both floor and ceiling were grids of some glowing, unfamiliar material that threw a pale, even light across the space. "This is the bridge of the Void Wanderer," Sophia's projection announced moments later, her voice lingering in the air. Harlan turned, spread his hands, and surveyed the emptiness. "Has this place been looted?" he asked. "There isn't even a single chair." "No, my lord, it has not." Sophia covered her mouth with her hand and smiled, not showing her teeth, a prim, measured expression that somehow made her words feel both reassuring and oddly formal. "You require a seat, do you not?" A soft, sleepy zzz answered her. At Sophia's words, a section of the floor behind Harlan rose up, metal extruding into a square pillar. Startled by the sudden movement, Harlan leapt back, nearly bringing his weapon down on the thing. To his surprise, the pillar flowed like mercury, reshaping itself until it became an impossibly comfortable chair. "Now that's more like it," he said, dropping into the seat. The chair molded to his back, and he let out a contented sigh. Really, the ancient ancestors knew how to live. Sophia paid his comment no mind. She called another seat into being beside Doom and inclined her head toward him. "My lord, please be patient," she said gently. "The engine core is beginning to output. The ship is waking. It will take a while to bring the weapon and shield cores online. The Void Wanderer's third heart has remained powerful and youthful since its creation," she added. "3 blue giants." "Wait a minute." Harlan sprang to his feet, disbelief written all over his face, cutting her off. Harlan's steel combat boots clanked against the deck as he stared, incredulous. "Are you telling me I'm sitting on a star?" his face contorted with disbelief. He couldn't fathom what sort of power could be harnessed that way. Yes, Sophia nodded, and a cross-sectional diagram of the warship unfolded in midair. 3 blue giants. The stern supplies propulsion, the midsection generates the shields, and the bow feeds the weapons. Doom looked on, equally stunned by the scale of human audacity. Humanity had reached into creation itself, capturing stars, the ultimate symbols of power, and forcing them to serve. They're sealed in pocket dimensions, Sophia continued, each one locked away, constantly feeding this arc warship with limitless energy. Her voice swelled with pride for her creator. This is a magnificent warship. By my calculations, it would still be cutting edge in today's universe. She projected the Void Wanderer in greater detail. A ship of pure technology. Nanobots flowed through its conduits, governed by a nanocore that repaired damage as it occurred. Teleportation conduits were etched along the spine like a nervous system, letting crew members appear anywhere on the ship at a moment's notice. Ship control systems online. Sophia's calm, measured voice rose almost lyrically. She was once a miraculous creation. The ship shuddered, a deep, low-frequency tremor, as the colossal vessel stirred. The armored canopy over the bridge rolled back like a scroll, and in an instant the starlight of the Nur system and the brilliance of distant suns poured in, a cascading river of light. Through the ship's viewport, you can see the former glory of Nur, Sophia intoned. Doom felt the awe wash over him and turned to the view. Above stretched the boundless starfield. Below lay a flat expanse of steel, a continent of metal. They must be standing at the center of the ship's upper fin, an unsurpassed vantage point. Nur ring functions restored, beginning shape transformation. Deactivating one-way dimensional shield came the next announcements. The white floor under their feet slowly grew transparent, unveiling the starry void that had been hidden beneath. The bridge opened into a panoramic command hall with no blind spots. All around them, Nur began to rotate, turning with deliberate, measured motion. The inner ring remained locked to the sky pillar, while the outer ring slowly pulled away, swinging outward until the two formed intersecting circles. "This is its true form," Harlan whispered. He dropped to one knee and let his hand hover over the virtual projection of Nur, tracing the newly revealed contours. Tears slipped from his eyes onto the floor, his breathing hitched with sobs. Only now, was Nur truly free. "My lord," Sophia said softly, uncertain, with the shield down, the ring system's astronomical telescopes picked up a strange phenomenon. What kind of phenomenon? Doom's gaze swept across the starfield displayed in the hollow, searching. Here. Sophia zoomed in on a patch of sky. A strange marker pulsed there, throwing off an unsettling, sickly light. Warp. Doom's eyes flashed, his hand balling into a fist before he could stop it. He knew that glow all too well. "They're everywhere," Harlan cursed, punching the floor and pushing himself to his feet. The morning had been beautiful. Now it ended with the sight of the warp. "I have something to say," he added, voice raw. Chapter 97, The Sole Survivor. "I don't understand." Sophia's voice was flat, clinical, rational but threaded with doubt. She sifted through the data center's archives, digging into the records from Nur's glorious era, but she found nothing that matched the strange astronomical event. Nothing in the logs, nothing in the star charts. Even without complex analysis, she could feel her master's anger, tightly buttoned beneath the surface. It radiated from his expression like heat. Logic couldn't tie a disturbance 1,000 light-years away to the present state of Nur, and yet the hatred behind his eyes was unmistakably real. Sophia extended her data tendrils into the deeper stores, probing Nur's dormant period for any clue. Most of what she found had been scrubbed, blanked entries, overwritten timestamps. Here and there were odd control commands traced back to her master. She recognized the signature. Doom had personally ordered a purge of chaos traces, and he had left instructions to bury what remained. The result was records made intentionally difficult to retrieve, secrets deliberately sequestered from even digital minds, hidden in leather-bound volumes and paper ledgers rather than in searchable code. And the warp? The term offered her little to grasp. In her constructed, human-derived understanding, it sounded like a charted route, a navigational channel, nothing supernatural. A helpless sigh passed through her simulated consciousness. So much time had eroded meaning, Whole contexts had been lost. She had computations and fragments, but the long arc of those years stretched beyond her reach. Doom tapped the cursed sigil on the display and looked up at Sophia. "How far away is it from us?" Sophia, whose senses were tuned to data, checked quickly before answering. "Compared with the old star charts, that anomalous region is about 1,000 light-years from here." 1,000 light-years? Doom frowned. The distance was enormous. The Nor worlds were largely unknown to him, and he didn't have enough forces to project power that far. He felt a sting of disappointment he pushed down with effort. Harlan exhaled slowly and smoothed a hand over his chest to calm himself. "Master," he began, "all Nur ring systems are online. Shall I dispatch intelligent machines to assist Nur's main planet?" Sophia looked to Doom for instructions, voice cautious. Doom was silent for a long beat, weighing risks and possibilities. Finally, he shook his head. "No." His face hardened. Nur's civilization had reached a fragile stability. Introducing autonomous machines now would upset the warrior's mindset. He had always known chaos, not distance or politics, was his true enemy, and intelligent machines were too unpredictable to be trusted. Chaos corrupted everything it touched. Even cold, inanimate things could be tainted. Whether soulless machines could resist that corruption remained an open question. For now he had a plan. Reclaim the Nor worlds, then assess the situation and decide the next steps. "Can you teleport us to the planet?" he asked. "Yes," Sophia answered, and without another word she activated the teleporter. In a flash of light, they were gone from the bridge, and then standing in the royal palace of the main defense territory. Outside, a crowd filled the main avenue, craning their necks to watch the shifting colors of the Nur ring overhead. "I knew it! You could do it!" Flano cried, eyes rimmed red. When Doom materialized, he could no longer contain himself and lunged forward to hug his brother. Doom's height made that impossible. Flano stood there, with his arms outstretched, awkward and unsure what to do next. Doom dropped to one knee and opened his arms toward Flano, his voice deep but gentle. "Without father and mother, and without your support, I couldn't have done any of this." Sophia blinked into being at once. The AI could appear anywhere. She gave a small, elegant curtsy. "My respects to you." Flano recognized her instantly. The artificial intelligence who had sealed Nur. He had rehearsed a dozen ways to meet her. Furious accusations, bitter questions, long rehearsed speeches. But when he finally stood before her, something in him eased. He smiled, relieved, and said simply, "Hello." Doom let go of his brother and turned to Harlan. "Go fetch the navigator. Bring 1,000 of the Night Watch with you." Harlan strode off toward the navigator household to find someone who could answer and to marshal the troops Doom wanted. Doom slipped his hand into Flano's, and the two of them sat down in the palace square. Doom spoke slowly, outlining the changes to the Nur ring and the choices its people had made. Flano listened, nodding and thinking, as he slowly absorbed the hidden history of what had happened. "I never expected the whole thing to come from a traitor," Sophia said. "Yes, master." She ground her teeth. "A traitor is far worse than an open enemy." Flano glanced around at the others. Their hatred was vivid and unmistakable, and couldn't help but admire, in his own cold way, the prudence of their ancestors. Before he could dwell on it further, Harlan returned, leading a girl by the hand. "The Navigator Patriarch insisted she's the best candidate," Harlan said as he presented her. "The old man's health is failing. She's the most talented in the family." Doom studied the timid, pale girl. Her head was bowed. White hair fell over her face, so her expression was hidden. Her hands twisted nervously in front of her stomach. He didn't like the choice. He wanted someone steady. Skill could be taught, but steadiness was essential. "What's your name?" he asked. Master. My name is Francisca," she replied in a soft, breathy voice. It was pleasant enough to hear, but it lacked conviction. Doom considered her for a moment, then made a brief decision. "Take her with you," he told Harlan. "You're responsible for her safety." He had decided to accept her into their service, but he wanted Harlan to keep a close eye on her. The voyage wouldn't be far, only to the nearby star systems, close enough that warp travel wasn't necessary. The navigator was being brought along, not because the route required exotic skills, but as an extra layer of security. Doom, much like his father had been in the past, believed in giving people opportunities. Bringing a navigator was one small way of extending that trust. 1,000-strong Night Watch had gathered at the end of the palace promenade, standing in neat ranks, weapons at the ready. "Be careful on your journey," Flano said as the teleportation light began to bloom. He looked at his brother with genuine concern despite knowing how capable he was. "You too, take care of yourself," Doom replied. Both men understood that a trip into deep space was no quick errand. It was the kind of voyage measured in years, not days or months. The light swallowed them, and then Doom reappeared on the ship's bridge. The hall was vast, big enough to hold over 1,000 people, and the sight beyond the viewports drew soft, involuntary reactions. "Wow!" Francisca's whisper brushed his ear. Her voice was small and full of wonder. The Night Watch around them were equally stunned and moved. None of them had ever watched Nur recede beneath them from orbit. "It's beautiful," someone murmured. At that moment, the Shadow Master Erica arrived as well, taking in the scene with the others. A woman in stealth armor crouched on the deck nearby, tears falling onto the floor. "First, run a sweep of the star system," Doom ordered Sophia. The Nur system had 7 planets, all terraformed. There ought to be signs of human activity somewhere. "As you wish." Sophia lifted her hand. The bridge's internal systems flickered to life, and the ship eased off its mooring as the steering thrusters engaged. Holographic displays, composed of shifting light and shadow, filled the spacious bridge, relaying the ship's attitude, vectors, and scan ranges in real time. Doom leaned back in his chair as the central projection showed the Void Wanderer methodically sweeping the Nur system. While the scans ran, he brought up the ship's internal databases and began to multitask through its schematics and systems. Deck layouts, subsystems, weapon arrays, he absorbed it all. Buried in the inventory manifest, he found something that made him pause. The warship harbored a sealed force of 100,000 Iron Man troops. Manufactured and stowed away within the vessel, they had remained dormant ever since. Fortunate enough to have been spared the silicon-based virus that had ravaged so much else. After arranging the Night Watch, Harlan settled into one of the bridge chairs. On this ship, a single command could produce whatever the crew needed. The chairs themselves could hover on anti-grav. He fell in behind the navigator and stood at the viewport, watching the starfield pass. "Master, no humans were detected in the Nur system," Sophia reported. She was attending to Doom and relayed the scans, then overlaid older records. Remnants of viral bombs were found on several worlds. Across the system, only Nur survived, protected by a dimensional shield. A hint of relief threaded through Sophia's synthetic voice. Perhaps sealing Nur those years ago had not been entirely wrong. Doom frowned. "The closest system is Mayan?" The library logs had placed Mayan 3 light-years from Nur. "Yes." Sophia brought up Mayan's coordinates and historical intelligence. "Set course for Mayan," Doom ordered without hesitation. "Master, shall we engage superluminal travel?" Sophia asked. Doom hesitated for a moment, then glanced at the navigator, who was staring out into the void beyond the viewport. He made his decision. Superluminal. "All hands, prepare. We're switching to superluminal travel." The Void Wanderer's 3-layer plasma engines roared to life. Massive thrusters, 7 on the top, 7 on the bottom, and 9 along the midline, erupted in streaks of azure plasma, turning the ship into a blazing comet with a long, luminous tail. 4 Nur, null, crystals locked into place and tore open a single-dimensional channel. The moment the ship applied its brakes, it vanished from the skies above Nur, slipping cleanly into a superluminal state. Chapter 98. We went too far. The ship shuddered once, and then they were in another star system. "That fast?" Harlan blinked, surprised. In the space of a heartbeat, they were someplace new. "Use that muscle-bound brain of yours for once," Erica snapped, edging away from the noisy, forehead-thumping man. "The faster you travel, the slower your time runs. We felt only an instant, but a long time passed out there." "She's right." Sophia brought up the star charts and ran a quick recalculation. By comparing the starlight, 5 months have passed outside. "We've arrived at Mayan. Here's the intel." Sophia projected the system data. Mayan was the star system nearest to Nur. It had once been a satellite world for Nur, primarily supplying agricultural produce. The entire system consisted of 4 planets. "Mayan still has human settlements," the report said. "An alien species has been detected as well, but there are no signs of intelligent machines. To Ma'ain, Doom ordered. The objective was clear. Doom turned the battleship, still throttling down from superluminal speed, and set a course for the main world. On Ma'in, Musala sat inside the fortress he had carved out of the old agricultural terraces and ran the daily numbers. Since leading the residents of the Nur Ring inward, he had organized their migration to Ma'in, a world that could still be grown into. After the betrayal that shattered the Nur worlds, the silicon virus unleashed by psychic traders that slaughtered every artificial mind, survival had depended on soil and seed rather than circuits. Relying on the hard-won knowledge of the stone men, Musala had kept the farms producing and the population fed. He had waited for news from Nur for centuries, even millennia in his estimation, but the signal never came. In the last 100 years, travelers from other star systems had begun to appear, brazen scavengers seeking to strip whatever technology remained in the Mayan system. The stone men would never let that happen. Mayan belonged to Nur. It belonged to humanity. Musala had begun rearming his people with whatever technology they could salvage. Even without the aid of the Iron Man, the stone men would stand watch over the Nur worlds. 100 years of war had drained their resources and let the alien enemy grow ever stronger. Musala felt himself on the edge of collapse. He didn't know how much longer he could hold out. Lord, Lord, Lord! An urgent shout snapped him from his thoughts. The human child was always so eager, Musala got a headache from the clamor. He almost didn't need to ask. Another alien attack, another drain on supplies. Then the boy's voice cut through again, breathless with excitement. Lord, a bright star has appeared in the night sky. Musala's heart leapt. A sudden bright star meant a ship had entered the mine system. He moved quickly, scooped the Boy Scout up with one massive hand, and ran out of the fortress. He looked up at the heavens and froze. The silhouette was unmistakable, the long, majestic hull, the trailing plasma stream that only one battleship carried. The Void Wanderer. The stone-bodied leader collapsed to his knees. For a moment he just stared, then he began to wave his arms at the sky, tears breaking free after so many hard years. His voice, hoarse and exhausted, cracked as he cried, "They're here! They're here! They've finally come!" He cried like a lost child who, abandoned and bewildered, suddenly sees his family returning. The Boy Scout beside him, gun clutched in both hands, stared in stunned silence. He had never seen an adult so undone. Beep, beep. Static hissed from the radio as Musala snatched it from the boy's grasp. A calm, unmistakably human voice came through. "This is the Void Wanderer. We are human. We come from Nur." Musala's hands shook. "I am Musala, the Stone Man. Sophia, hearing your voice after all this time." His voice broke. "I'm in tears." "So it's you." Sophia sounded surprised. She had not expected a familiar voice on Mayan. "Then will you return to Nur's embrace?" "Yes, I'll do anything." Musala sobbed into the radio, afraid of losing Nur again. Blue light shimmered in front of them, and a towering figure in armor strode forward, flanked by a company of warriors. Beside the armored giant stood a woman wrapped in a blue aura, Sophia herself. Doom stepped ahead of the formation and approached Musala. The stone man's flesh showed its age. Weary lines carved his face, and his eyes were wet with hopeful tears as he looked up at the people who had come for him. Doom helped the kneeling Musala to his feet and said, quietly, "I am Doom, the current ruler of Nur. I saw the message you left in the Nur Ring's control center." Musala stared at him, eyes hollow with disbelief. Nur, returned? He was speechless. To convince himself he wasn't still trapped in a dream, he reflexively struck the cheek of the small boy who had been crouched nearby. The child's cry of pain shattered the momentary unreality. Musala's hands trembled as he sank to his knees again. "Overlord, please forgive me," he choked out. Leaving the Nur Ring was unavoidable. He began to confess his failures, voice breaking as he piled apology upon apology at Doom's feet. "You did nothing wrong," Doom interrupted, calm and firm. "On the contrary, you did very well. Your decision saved many lives." Doom tugged Musala up, brushing the dust and wariness from his shoulders with practiced gentleness. Musala instinctively stepped back, ashamed to soil the radiant figure before him with his filth. Doom caught his wrist with an uncompromising but gentle grip and guided him to sit on a nearby rock. He settled beside him and, softer now, asked, "Tell me, what happened here?" Musala swallowed and reported what the orbital scans had shown, an unknown alien species clashing with human forces. Someone at his side spat the identification without hesitation. They're lizardmen. At the name, Musala's face darkened into a mask of hatred. The word seemed to pull all the pain and fury in him into a single, cold expression. These aliens were not powerful. Back in Nur's heyday, even a single golden man on the periphery could sway the fate of an entire species. The lizardmen were a young race, only just reaching into deep space and lacking even superluminal drives. Their only real advantage was sheer numbers. They came to man to fight humans, and to plunder the enormous, city-sized agricultural machines that dotted the Mayan system. For a fledgling species, those machines represented a staggering fortune. To sustain prolonged conflicts with humans, the lizardmen built nests and cities across the territories they occupied. As Musala spoke, Doom could see why the situation had become so desperate. They had fled Nur in a cargo ship. By the time they reached Mayan, only 1 in 1,000 had survived the voyage. Over the following millennia, their population slowly recovered, but then lizardmen raiding fleets returned and swept through their settlements again. I understand. Doom turned to Sophia beside him. How many enemies are in the lizardman city? Any humans? 20 million lizardmen, she answered, and a few hundred human captives. Then what are you waiting for? Doom said. After a heartbeat's thought, he gave the order. Sophia was to do what needed to be done. A few hundred human defenders against a city of 20 million lizardmen warriors. There was no need to debate it. In orbit, the Void Wanderer's honeycomb deck folded open, exposing the hidden lance of light. The weapon required no deliberate aiming. Its guaranteed hit system only had to fire. A vast orange-red beam arced strangely through the sky and slammed into the surface of Mon. The planet shuddered. Sophia's calm voice reported, "The alien city is completely destroyed, no residual contamination." Musala sank to the deck, the sight of that sky-piercing lance dredging up memories of humanity's distant past. He steadied himself and said, "Let's go. On to the next planet." This was only the beginning of Doom's campaign. 64 core worlds in the Nor system still lay ahead, waiting to be taken. Doom swept through them like wildfire, one conquest after another, inheriting the legacy left by humanity's ancestors. At the edge of the star system, space itself trembled. A ship peeled out of the warp and slipped back into real space. "We've gone too far this time. We've strayed off the main route for too long." On the bridge, the Geller field collapsed, and the armored shutters that sealed the viewport retracted. Visibility returned. The warriors of the 5th Legion, scouts of the Emperor, found themselves spat out of a warp storm into a distant starfield. By the Terra Council of War's charts, this sector lay in the northern reaches of the galaxy, far from Terra, the halo stars. "There are ships fighting over there," someone said. On the ship's recon feed, they picked out 2 vessels locked in combat, one in pursuit, the other trying to flee. A flare of warp energy bloomed at the edge of the system. A battleship had just jumped in. "My good brother Harlan," a voice called. Harlan had been driving down an enemy force that refused to yield to Nur. Their fleet had been shattered, and he was chasing the last of them. "That must be their relief battleship. Brother Turing, steady your aim and hit them hard." Harlan's words went to Turing, an Iron Man posted in the command center. War had come at last. Doom roused the Iron Men and asked them if they would renew their allegiance. Nur pledged to recognize them as full persons, equal to any sentient being. The Iron Men answered in turn and joined the campaign to seize the star systems. 30 years of conquest had forged a close bond between Harlan and the Iron Man Turing. They spoke to one another as brothers. When a ship slipped into the contested system, Harlan gave the order, and Turing keyed the light lance array, sending a spear of energy streaking toward the intruder. "That vessel is relic technology," someone on the bridge shouted. "It's more advanced than ours. Its range and firepower outclass us by far." Aboard the 5th Legion battleship, the Void Shield danced and flared as enemy salvos hammered it. The firepower bearing down on them was too great. The shields wouldn't hold for long. "Accelerate. Exploit our speed advantage. Ram them and board," the captain barked. In the end, the 5th Legion chose to close with the enemy and take them by force. Speed, impact, and then the Space Marines would fight their way inside. Chapter 99. Boarding. As the two warships closed, the 5th Legion's vessel rose up from below through the black emptiness. Its plasma drive left a river of fire in the void. The heat and ion exhaust hammered the opponent, forcing the enemy to power down offensive systems and divert every available joule into engines and shields. Harlan's flagship was an old warship, but it still packed lance batteries that could tear a corvette in half. One well-aimed volley punched through and overloaded the Imperium ship's void shields. Under the Iron Man's steady hand, the heavy lances kept swinging, searing the hull and melting away outer plating. "Brother Turing, cease fire!" Harlan shouted. On the holodisplay, the other ship's outline finally resolved as it slipped clear of the warp interference. Harlan's voice was urgent. The silhouette wasn't like the Resistance Alliance vessels he knew. The Alliance ships were aging and shared a common technological lineage with Nur, so their silhouettes were familiar. This ship was a different breed entirely. The warship that bled out of the warp into the star system looked nothing like the vessels Harlan knew. It followed a different technological lineage altogether. Nearly 3 kilometers long, its hull was sheathed in heavy plates. Macro cannons and long spear-like lances jutted from its flanks, giving the ship a brutal, almost feral silhouette. Crude and ungainly at first glance, it was also unmistakably a mature industrial design, an off-the-shelf war machine built for mass production. A few seconds of diagnostic work was all Harlan needed. The signature didn't match anything in the Resistance Alliance database. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" he ordered sharply, cutting through the rising chatter on the bridge. Harlan's dislike of the warp only deepened in that moment. Its foul energies warped sensors and scrambled the thin thread of reality that the fleet relied on. Without clear friend or foe identification, the detection arrays struggled to say whether a ship had come out of the warp hostile or neutral. In the Nor worlds, the standing doctrine was ruthless and simple. Any warship that emerged from the warp without a friendly ID was treated as an enemy. The idea was to strike first, before the craft had a chance to complete its re-entry procedures and raise its combat posture, seizing the initiative while the intruder was still scrambling. By the time the holographic display finished rendering the enemy ship, several lance volleys had already struck. The unknown warship's void shields had been overloaded and its hull was melting under the impact. "Cease fire," Harlan ordered immediately. "Turing, send a transmission. Ask them where they came from." Turing, the Iron Man, raised his metal hand and scratched the back of his head. His synthesized voice carried a hint of embarrassment. "My calculations indicate they will not receive any communications," he said. "I destroyed their communications array." Harlan stared at him, his mouth twitching in disbelief. "You tell me this every time we board a ship," he said. "You always say, when you attack a ship, hit the comm array first. Turn them deaf so they can't call for help or coordinate." Turing shrugged, palms up, as if innocence were all the explanation that mattered. Everything was according to tactics. "Well," Harlan said dryly, "you certainly hit it accurately." He looked back at the holographic projection. The alien warship had been turned into a ruin. External sensor clusters and antennae sheared away, armor plates blistered and melted, systems dangling like scorched wiring. It floated there in the holo like a charred piece of driftwood set against the black. "I certainly hit it accurately," Turing declared, electronic eyes flashing as he accepted Harlan's praise. Harlan's harsh expression shifted into something closer to bafflement. The Iron Men were superb at warfare, cold, relentless logic that cut through the chaos, but they sometimes missed subtle human context. There was no time to argue that now. The enemy war, ship raced forward as if bent on a suicide charge. "Send a light signal," Harlan ordered. Obediently, Turing took control of the ship's exterior lighting. The warship's hull began to pulse in a precise rhythm, a visual hail asking the other vessel's origin and allegiance. Inside the Imperium ship, the hull held thanks to its force field braces, but everything else was failing. External systems were dead, alarms strobing across the control rooms. Imperium crewmen dumped into compartments, scrambling to jury-rig repairs and stabilize what remained of the ship. On the deck, 20 Space Marines readied themselves for a boarding action, one last desperate move to salvage a losing battle. The boarding craft stood ready, and the Space Marines filed aboard in precise military silence. The warship holding them back eased to a safe distance. Macro cannons on the flagship would lay down covering fire while the boarding party made its approach. The enemy vessel was unusually powerful. This had to be a decisive strike. If they succeeded, the relic warship could be taken as a trophy and a new flagship. The Imperium's men took pride in the idea that nothing could stand against a Space Marine. Then, abruptly, the white ship that had been taking lance fire fell silent. The keening of its defenses stopped. Its shuddering ceased. Over the lieutenant's helmet channel, the captain's voice came through. "Sir, they've ceased fire and are sending a light signal." The lieutenant kept his reply cold, tamping down the anger left by the bombardment. "What are they saying?" The captain moved to the viewport and watched the percussion of lights along the hull. The enemy was flashing out standard lantern codes, signals for unintentional attack, misidentification, declarations of intent, and even an offer to cease resistance. He added, "They're using common light signals. They're short, only the basic meanings. The exact wording will depend on their code compilation." During the golden age of humanity, star clusters didn't just use standard light signals. Some even developed their own local dialects. The mortal captain stared at the flickering patterns, parsing the unfamiliar syntax the way an old linguist might sort through a dusty manuscript. After a moment, he replied over the comms, careful with each word. "They say the attack was an accident, a mistaken judgment. They want to know where we came from." His translation was precise and measured. The 5th Legion lieutenant, a Space Marine whose instincts were as sharp as his hearing, picked up on the captain's pause over the channel. "And what else?" he asked. The captain hesitated, then finished deliberately. "They're telling us to surrender." He let the meaning hang in the air, mentally sighing. From his perspective, it was more likely a misunderstanding. His ship had strayed into the enemy's engagement zone. The message may have been brusque, but not necessarily malicious. "Impossible!" The lieutenant's fury snapped free, his roar reverberating down the warship's corridors. "We are the vanguard of the Imperium of Man. We will never surrender. We are the Emperor's death angels," he bellowed, "and we bring destruction to the Imperium's foes." He was the first to hurl himself into the boarding pod, voice raw with righteous fury. "Brothers, to the ship! Let these cowards who hide behind their battle glory see what true power looks like." "Hoo-ha!" The Space Marines answered with a single thunderous cry. The boarding pod's clamps came down, sealing the compartment and locking the Marines in place against the crushing forces of acceleration. In their gene seed lay the warlike instincts and unbreakable will the Emperor had wrought into them. To ask an Astartes to surrender was inconceivable. Macro cannons and lance batteries. Salvo fire. "Cover the Astartes' approach," the captain ordered as he strode back to his command throne. At his command, the ship's guns answered, a dense barrage spilling out to blanket the boarding craft and suppress the enemy's defenses. Still, it was those pods themselves, carrying the Emperor's angels, who were the real killing blow, the true instrument of the assault. Harlan's warship coasted through the black, waiting for the unknown vessel to answer. Then, abruptly, the enemy began to move. Macro cannons hummed as they stored kinetic energy, lances spooled up, the opposing hull shuddering as if bracing for a fight. "If they dare open fire, we'll answer in kind," Harlan said. He felt a flicker of unease. He had stood down and sent a hail, but the other ship, having seen the signal, was clearly preparing to strike back. He respected their nerve. "Don't hold back," he told his crew. "Give them a dignified death." Turing's electronic tendrils snaked from his chest into the ship's core, interfacing with the combat systems. Power was rerouted, shields reinforced, every energy conduit primed to absorb the first impact. In the taut silence that followed, the Imperium's lances struck first, orange-red beams lancing out and slamming against the void shields. "Return fire," Harlan barked, though Turing's processors had already taken over. With lightning-fast calculations, Turing targeted multiple weak points in the enemy hull and unleashed coordinated volleys. The Imperium's macro cannons were crude but devastating. From electromagnetic accelerator barrels, they hurled 100-meter solid slugs, pushing them up to a tenth of light speed. The Nur ship's armament was worse still. Panels peeled back along its smooth hull to reveal grid-like decks bristling with lances and long-range plasma arrays. Against that glare and thunder of fire, two tiny boarding craft slipped through the dark, riding the chaos. Blasts from macro cannons and streaking torpedoes painted the void in strobe bursts, masking the intruder's approach. Boarding craft detected. The ship's sensors screamed an alarm and stamped odd contacts onto the hollow tactical map, signatures with internal life signs. Harlan zoomed the feed in. The little shapes resolved, maneuvering, heading straight for them. Two words lodged in his mind. Boarding action. "Night watch, attention," he barked. "We have guests arriving on our ship." Boarding action. The phrase tasted of old history. On Terra during the Age of Sail, when shipboard cannons lacked the decisiveness of modern weapons, combat was often settled by men swinging across on ropes to kill or capture an enemy crew. The principle was the same now, only far deadlier. Close, violent boarding with crews and weapons that could turn an airlock into a killing field. Chapter 100. Night Sentinel versus Space Marines. The Imperium of Man clashed with the Nor worlds, and the outcome of the fleet action had already been decided. The boarding phase had begun. Emperor's Death Angels dropped from the void. Their pods were low signature and crawled at sublight speeds to avoid tripping the enemy ship's void shield protocols, slipping through the opposing point defense nets like razor spikes. Harlan's scars twitched as he grinned, a feral, hungry smile carving his face. "Let them in," he barked. Since the campaign to reclaim the Nor worlds began, the Night Watch had hardly drawn their blades. Most engagements had been long-range bombardments. Once an enemy void fleet was shattered, rebellious planets and alliances surrendered quickly. Even the most stubborn holdouts folded when the void fleet put landing forces ashore. The combined weight of Iron Men and Night Watch was enough to cow any garrison. Those who saw that deployment usually chose the sensible option and capitulated. But someone had the gall to try boarding. Good. Let them come. They would meet the Night Watch blade to blade. Turing warped the shields long enough to open a slit, let the boarding pods slip through, then sealed them shut. The pods streaked for the battleship's weak points. Their hull-mounted melta-charges chewed through armor, and the pods slammed into the superstructure like iron rams. When a hatch flew open, Space Marines poured out, bolt guns ready, like wolves unleashed. Air hissed and pressure bled away, but magnetic boots held them fast to the deck. They swept their gaze over the interior to take in the combat environment. What met them was startling. A bright, immaculate ship, white, gridded decking, and broad, tasteful corridors. This relic of a battleship was spacious and uncluttered, nothing like the cramped, shadowed vessels of the Imperium. The Marines, battle-hardened and fierce, blinked at the civilized order of it all, as if they'd stepped from a savage frontier into a polished metropolis. Corridors ran off to the left and right. The lieutenant pushed aside any hesitation and barked, "Follow me." "We're moving toward the bow. We're going to settle accounts with them." A textbook boarding action would have split the force, Lath sweeping toward multiple vital nodes to sow chaos across the ship and avoid being cut down in one place. The lieutenant had other ideas. He wanted to decapitate the command layer, seize the relic battleship intact, and then evacuate personnel. So he led his men as a single, furious blade. The Space Marines fell in behind him, turning right and jogging hard for the bridge. The corridor around them only heightened their unease. Transparent panels ran along the walls, giving them an unobstructed view of the ship's interior. From that vantage, the battleship looked less like a warship and more like a self-regulating city. Cranes, conveyor belts, and automated carriers ferried shells, provisions, and spare parts up and down the hull. No sentries stood watch. No crews tended the machinery. The whole scene suggested the aging vessel might be running itself, a ghost of a warship, animated by cold, efficient systems rather than living men. When the 20 armored figures reached a side hall, the space inside was disappointingly ordinary, nothing but a scatter of cargo crates and emptiness beyond. "Over there." The lieutenant jabbed a gauntleted hand toward a side passage and signaled his brothers to move. They were halfway down the hall when the airlocks behind them, and the one ahead, slammed shut. "Prepare for demolition," the lieutenant ordered, his voice calm as if issuing a routine instruction. A few doors would not trap Space Marines. He also knew they were being watched. The ship's operators toyed with intruders like a cat with a mouse, daring to mock the Emperor's Astartes. They had forgotten one thing: you do not play with a cornered space marine. Harlan, up on the bridge, watched them closely, eyes fixed on the tall, swift figures moving through the corridor. Their power armor was scarce, rude and brutal, the packs bulky and oversized, but the men inside fought with tight, efficient coordination. A clipped voice came over the comms. Cover the Night Watch's entry. Test their combat capabilities. Floodlights snapped on along the hall, throwing the Marines into stark illumination. Instantly, the brothers brought their bolt guns to the ready. Almost all 20 eyes in the corridor were fixed on the two doors, the only obvious exits, while a few of them never stopped sweeping the empty spaces for anything that might move. "Stay alert. The enemy's coming," the lieutenant grunted over the comms, leveling his plasma pistol in his left hand and igniting the power sword in his right. The light grew and grew until it washed out the hall. The brightness blurred edges and made the air look like liquid silver. Even the Marines' helmet visors couldn't fully filter it. They instinctively drew together, helmets flicking between optic feeds as each man tried to find a gap in the glare. Their ocular implants began to overload in the super-bright conditions. The world reduced itself to a white tunnel, and they could only make out shapes within a few meters. Then Lyman's ear picked up motion, faint, multiple rustlings in the silent corridor, 20 distinct sources of sound. Before the lieutenant could give an order, the Astartes answered the signal themselves. Bolt guns barked like thunder. Bang, bang, bang! The crude, brutal report of contrabass fire filled the hall as they poured aimed lead into the noise. They strained to hear through the bleaching white glare, picking up the faint, distant thumps of bolter rounds finding their marks. For a long moment there was nothing, just the muffled roar and the blank light. Then the brilliance faded, and the hall snapped back into focus. 20 warriors stood where the empty air had been. Clad in scarred white power armor and carrying weapons that pulsed with blue light, they filled the corridor like statues come to life. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but their posture was all edge and intent. Without a word, they raised their weapons and pointed them at the others. "Capture them," the command rang out. It was the Night Watch who had teleported in. Harlan's jaw tightened. He wanted those strangers taken alive so they could be interrogated. There would be no parley, only force and careful strategy. The two groups paired off with a grim, efficient understanding, soldier against soldier, leader against leader, brute against brute, hero against hero. Bolt guns barked. The heavy-caliber weapons fed themselves in savage, mechanical rhythm. Rounds hammered the Night Watch's dimensional shields in sparks of blue light that winked out as if swallowed by the void. The Space Marines' faces hardened. In an instant, they dropped their bolters, drew their combat knives, and surged forward for close quarters. Plasma bolts fizzed out against the Night Watch's energy shields as the lieutenant, power sword raised, led the charge. The long hall that had felt roomy only moments before suddenly seemed cramped as 40 superhuman warriors closed to blade range. For the Emperor, the Space Marines roared, their cry bouncing off the ventilation grills. "We are the Blades of Nur," the Night Watch answered, weapons flashing as they met the onrush. When they collided, the Space Marines slashed for the gaps in the white-armored warriors' joints, but their strikes were met and stopped by parrying blades. Steel rang on steel in a dozen brief exchanges, then the combatants split apart and reformed ranks. That rhythm, strike, block, withdraw, repeated itself all across the chamber at once, each clash mirrored by another a heartbeat away. Both sides felt the same shock. How could their opponents match their speed? Before the Space Marines could fully recover, some of them found their weapons sliced away by the Night Watch's dimensional light blades. Blades that cut through metal like a hot knife through cloth. After only a heartbeat of stunned surprise, the Night Watch pressed the advantage. Unfazed, Hay closed again, weapons whirring as they launched their counterattack. They had seen the weapon's power, and now the Space Marines fell back, dodging the blazing edges. The contest in the hall was hopelessly one-sided. No matter how proud their physique, the Marines' power armor and guns were simply outclassed by these unfamiliar foes, and one by one, the Emperor's warriors were being driven to the brink. The lieutenant was in the worst of it. In the first exchange, his power sword had been cleaved in two by the enemy's lightsaber. He fought on with the stub of a blade, its remaining edge still humming with a disintegrating field, but it was a losing proposition. The white-armored opponent was not only armed with a razor-sharp weapon, he moved with terrifying skill. He danced inside the lieutenant's reach. The lieutenant couldn't land a single blow. The little of the sword he had left was being eaten away as the duel wore on, until he was forced to twist to avoid a killing strike. In that instant, he turned his back to the enemy. He felt the weight of his armor sag, felt his muscles fail to synchronize with the systems that should have strengthened them. Then his legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees. When the light faded in his vision, he knew why. The power pack had been ruptured. With its core destroyed, a suit of power armor was nothing but a sealed tomb. In that hall, scenes like this were not rare. The Night Watch's restraint technique left the Space Marines baffled. Its eerie hesitation and sudden bursts of power broke the rhythms they trained to read. A gunblade that seemed aimed squarely for a Marine's head would lose its momentum the instant the Marine braced to block. With a snap of reverse thrust, the hilt would wedge between his legs and flip him into the air. While he hung there, helpless and weightless, the Night Watch would pivot, slip behind him, and cut through the power pack. One after another, their packs were severed. Some of the Space Marines ended up sprawled on their backs, some prone on the deck, a few still standing but disarmed and unsteady. Bragging about weapon superiority, the lieutenant spat through clenched teeth, forcing himself up against the weight of his armor. The Night Watch sheathed his blade and regarded the stubborn officer with a cool, appraising look. "You're interesting," he said. "Even if this were just hand-to-hand, you still wouldn't beat me." He turned his weapon away, satisfied the invaders were no longer a threat. There was no point trying to strip their suits. The power armor itself made removal difficult, and the Marines were already neutralized.